Hello, everybody. Glad you can make it out today. We have a lot to talk about, as we always do, so I'm going to jump right in and get started. As you can tell from our class agenda, the first thing we'll be doing is learning the 5-step method for reading comp. Just like for logic games and logical reasoning, we have a method at Kaplan for how to deal with reading comp. So that way you're never sitting there wondering what to do next. You'll always have a very clear-cut notion of how to proceed in any passage and question set you run up against. After that, we're going to talk about a new way to read, or at least what will likely be a new way for many of you. And that's what this picture with Elsa refers to, which is many of you are reading these passages in a bit too much depth. You're focusing on too many of the details, and you really need to let it go. Hello, Amy, Bella, to everyone that's saying, hey, glad you can make it out. So yeah, the new way we're going to be reading is to let a lot of the details, let a lot of the little stuff go, at least on our initial read. And that can feel a bit strange at first, but we're going to practice it today so that way you can get more used to it. After that, we're going to go over the different types of questions that exist, showcase how to defeat them, and then we're going to give you a chance to put it all together on your own. And what that means is, of course, getting to read the passage in this new way and try doing questions. Very end of today's class lesson, we're going to do a preview of comparative reading. Comparative is a twist that they can give you on the test, and they always will. There will always be one comparative passage in the set. You will have actually already seen one of these. This is a passage A, passage B. You had one of those on your diagnostic. We'll talk more about them today, and then we'll cover them again later on in our class lessons, which will give us another opportunity to talk about reading comp, which would be nice. As always, have your lesson book today, and don't ever forget that if you need anything after our sessions, or even during, we are here for you. So talk with us in the chats if you have any questions, something we can help out with, or you can always email us too, and you see that listed in the agenda. Moving onward to your homework, we of course always want to check in and see how that's going for you. So if you haven't filled out this poll yet, please do let us know what you have been completing. We of course just get to see you once a week besides the email conversations we have with each other. We want to make sure that you're using that time in the best way possible. We know that a few days away from class, it's easy to sort of get caught up in other life things. So the point of this poll below me is to hold you accountable to a degree, to make you go, I really wish I could click that I had finished the high yield skills 3 assessment. I need to, right? So really use this as an opportunity to be happy if you did do the homework, or recognize that you should be doing more if you haven't yet. All right, taking a look here, let's see what has been done. 96% in that LR1 post-session assessment. That is what I like to see. Really and truly, everybody, these post-session assessments are huge because they give you an opportunity to see how did you go about doing the questions that we just worked on together, meaning are you using the techniques? Are those techniques working for you? What's easier? What's harder? What do you still need to practice? So these post-session assessments can really give you insight in terms of what you need to work on after our class lessons. So thrilled to see this many of you doing it. Keep those numbers exactly where they are. High yield skill assessment, this, we see the dip. And this is what often happens. Students are like, well, high yield, it's the same stuff. I don't really need to worry about it. High yield literally means these are the questions that are going to make up the bulk of your score. So you definitely do need to make sure that these are question types that are going well for you. And the reason why we test you on the same types of questions again and again is to make sure that you get to see that growth over time. For those of you that have seen your high yield score go up, I'm sure that's been motivating, that's been nice. If your high yield score has stayed the same or even gone down, I hope that's also motivated you to do some more studying or even reach out to us, which some of you have, about questions in your practice. So please, if you haven't done this yet, do so. I'm glad that more than 3/4 of you have, but I'd love to see that at the same percentage the post-session assessment is. Moving onwards in terms of teach me more and test me more, actually really cool that we're starting to see this swing toward more test. Previously, we had a bit more teach, and that's fine in the beginning. In the very beginning of your studies, you're new, you're learning the methods, and you need more exposure to exactly how do I approach these different types of questions, or remind me what that method is. And that's where the teach me more can be good for you with channel and reading in your books. But as the lessons progress, you need to be able to do these questions on your own. So I'm actually really glad to see 2/3 of you doing test me more, doing additional questions to make sure you can complete what we are learning together on your own, so you can do the same on test day. In terms of the move to the next session, 0%. Okay. Really do keep in mind, everybody, that Once you feel you've mastered the content we've worked on previously, and mastered doesn't mean it's perfect, but just that you're comfortable with it, you know how to approach it, please do feel free to move ahead. Now, I know some of you might say, Jeff, I needed the whole week to become comfortable with main point questions and role of a statement and point of issue and method of argument and parallel reasoning. Or maybe you also needed the week to go back and practice more of strict sequencing games or selection or formal logic, and that's fine. But honestly, the moment all of those types you just heard me say are going well for you, you should move forward. So keep that in mind for this week. The moment that you're feeling comfortable with reading comp and what we've discussed, do feel free to work ahead. And remember, to work ahead, you just want to watch the lesson on demand version of the class. It's a recorded version of the class, and start doing the homework. And it's perfectly okay to have watched the recorded version and then watch the live version, because you can get a lot out of it seeing it twice. If recordings aren't your bag, you don't like watching recordings of stuff, it's boring to you, you can always let us know, and we can find other live sessions of the class that can potentially be happening. So don't hesitate to work at it if you ever feel comfortable with everything we've talked about, all right? Moving on with the formal logic, as I promised you previously, we want to make sure that you are slowly but steadily learning how to translate formal logic statements. Now, giving us a read of Jeff will get popcorn only if he's at the movies. What was the word there that really stood out to you? And Amy, I'm glad to hear that you're making a pledge. You're going to do more homework over this next week. Good. Okay, yeah. Only if. Only if should really pop out to you. Now, if anybody out there is saying, why only if? Well, only if is very strong language, and that's the core of formal logic, finding very emphatic, strong words that create definite situations. Also keep in mind that you can see a list of classic sufficient and necessary words on page 655. That's page 655 of your lesson book. So if you see this phrasing only if and you don't know what it means, go to page 655 and you'll find out. Meredith, yes. Meredith is bringing up that only if is a necessary condition that, of course, affects the way we write the formal logic. It then tells us that Jeff is at the movies. This is actually a relatively commonly used structure. We see this happen in a couple different questions in logical reasoning, where they'll give you a formal logic statement, and then they'll give you a fact. So that's what just happened here. The first sentence is a formal logic statement. The second sentence is a fact that relates to it, because movies relates, right? Then it asks, what do we know? Taking a look at your answers, we do have a very interesting mix. Some of you in Jeff is getting popcorn, another in a formal logic statement, and then a couple of you in the nothing. Let's talk about the formal logic of that first sentence. Tell me, everybody, please, in fact, write it in chat. Go ahead. How would you shorthand Jeff will get popcorn only if he's at the movies? Tell me right down below. What would that look like? Okay. All right, I'm seeing a lot of good translations here. Most of them are correct. Be careful, be careful. Notice it's if Jeff is getting popcorn. Now, I know some of you got thrown by that will. That might have made you think that popcorn is happening later, but it is if Jeff is getting popcorn, then he is at the movies. So popcorn, arrow, movies. And again, we know that because only if is a necessary word. So the only if becomes the arrow, moving from left to right. So popcorn, arrow, movies, right? Now, the fact says Jeff is at the movies. Looking at the formal logic statement of popcorn, arrow, movies, is movies the sufficient or necessary term in that formal logic statement? Which is, I remember, sufficient is on the left, necessary is on the right. It would be necessary. Does a necessary statement give you more information? Does a necessary statement lead to more knowledge? More facts? No, it doesn't. And in case anyone's having a little bit of difficulty seeing this, I'm just going to write it up for you. So we have popcorn, arrow, movies. The fact then says movies, right? Knowing that we have movies, which you'll see me put in red, like knowing that that's happening. Notice this is why we draw the arrow. We can't go backward. We have to respect the direction of the arrow. The truth is that movies, in that formal logic statement, knowing that Jeff is at the movies, doesn't give you any other information. If you're thinking that movies leads to popcorn, you're taking that formal logic and turning it backward. So when we read that second answer down that says Jeff is getting popcorn, well, maybe Jeff is getting popcorn, but we don't know that for sure. The next one says if Jeff isn't getting popcorn, then he's not at the movies. Tell me real quick, everybody, this formal logic of not getting popcorn, then not at the movies. So that is answer number 4. How does that answer relate to the original formal logic? Not popcorn, then not movies. I see we have a night school fan out there. Is that a valid contrapositive? How do we make contrapositives, everybody? Remind me. Contrapositive is created by doing what? We have to reverse and negate. So what answer 4 is doing is just negating the original formal logic statement, and that's not true. I mean, maybe that could be happening, but again, we don't know. So answer 2, which says that Jeff is getting popcorn, that is not something we know. That is a wrong answer. You can see me putting an X beside that double X. This next one is a bad contrapositive. We don't know that. That's out as well. Then we get to the last one. And I know this last answer can seem weird when it says nothing, right? But the truth is, a necessary term doesn't give us any additional information. This is the right answer. All we know is Jeff is at the movies. That's it. We don't know anything for sure about popcorn or about the movie I'm seeing, because of course the exact movie is outside the scope. We didn't mention that before. Now, I know this particular question can feel a bit sneaky where the right answer is nothing, but it's meant to teach you a very important lesson, which is learning a necessary term does not provide you with any additional information. So when we learn movies here, that doesn't give us anything more. The other thing we want to make sure you learn is only if is a necessary term. So only if turns into the arrow going from left to right. You will notice that there's one other little poll here. It just says, how are you feeling? This is your opportunity to let us know how you're feeling about yourself, your studies, the LSAT, all that good stuff. This is not one we reveal. This is just for internal use. Feel free to click it or not. The choice is yours. But that is our opening, everybody. I hope that was enough to get you warmed up and ready for reading comprehension, as well as, of course, checking on your homework and your formal logic know-how. Don't stress formal logic too much. We're going to keep practicing it in class, and you're going to keep getting practice with it in your homework when you do content that relates to formal logic. Really and truly, formal logic is memorization, and memorization happens over time. Okay, let's talk about reading comp. For many students, reading comprehension is a part of the test that people don't spend time on. Be honest with me. Have any of you out there thought to yourself, well, logic games is really weird, so I definitely need to study that. Plus, I heard Jeff say I can get points quickly on it. Logical reasoning is half the test, so yeah, I definitely need to work on that too. Reading comp, I mean, I've already done reading comp before. I'll just let that one ride. Anyone have this thought go through their head, perhaps? Yeah, this is really common among test takers. And listen, it makes sense, right? Reading comp is the one part of the test that all of you have had practice with previously. However, as I'm noticing some of you say, once you get in to learning the methodologies associated with reading comp, meaning once you learn these Kaplan techniques, you're going to realize that the way you're reading right now is not necessarily going to be the most effective way for you on test day. Don't get me wrong, there are things that all of you are doing in all of the sections that are working, right? Meaning all of you have a way that you're doing reading comp or logical reasoning, logic games, at least one little thing that is working for you, and we don't want to take that away. So if you're strong in reading comprehension, we want you to keep that. We're not looking to massively change what you're doing, but we do want to make sure that all of you are approaching this part of the test with the right mindset. First part of that mindset is recognizing you can change your reading comp score, and it is worth it to spend some time on it. It is true, though, that changing reading comp can take longer than the other sections. Can anyone tell me why? Why is this a part of the test that can take just a greater investment of time to see a change in score? Manola, we'll definitely be talking about how you can read faster, and it's actually by letting go, as Elsa said, by reading less. Because you're breaking a habit. Exactly. You all have a way that you read, that you are used to doing. Whereas with logic games, I mean, unless you do a lot of puzzles just in your life, you probably don't have a set method you were doing before Kaplan, right? Unless you took like another company previously, in which case it can take you some time to break the habit. Same thing with logical reasoning. I mean, even if you'd argued before, you probably didn't have a habit created for that part of the test. For reading comp, I would wager that just about everybody here has a way that they're used to doing reading comp. What is the way that many of you are used to doing a reading comp passage? Meaning, how do you normally read when in high school or college or somewhere else in life? Someone tells you to read something and then answer questions about it. Right, you read the whole thing. You read for the content. Exactly right. You read really every word, right? Each part you're spending time on. Read, write, rereading. Exactly right. Maybe write some notes on the side. Good, good, good. What could be the downside of reading everything, reading every word, and rereading time? It takes so long. How many of you here were really struggling to finish the reading comp section on the diagnostic, or I shouldn't even say struggling. How many of you just didn't finish the reading comp section on the diagnostic? You heard 5 minutes call, you have like a whole passage still left to do. This is super common, all right? And again, not everybody. Some of you out there might be just really strong in reading comp and you're able to move through it quickly. But for many, many, many students, we see timing being a huge issue in reading comp because of the length. Really, reading comprehension is the longest section on the test, not only because you have these really long passages to read, but also because you have the most questions in reading comp. Reading comp has 26 to 28 questions in the entire section. It's more than any of the others, all right? And Bella, yeah, some of you that might have made it through the entirety of the reading comp section ended up rushing in order to do that, and then you make mistakes, right? And obviously, timing is something that can be brutal for all of the sections. But the reason we're having this conversation right now is, as so many of you are realizing, the way you have read in the past is likely going to take too long to read on the LSAT. And some of you might have even felt before, how do they possibly expect us to read all of this content, answer this many questions about it in just 35 minutes? And the truth is, they really don't expect you to read everything. They expect you to learn how to speed up in certain areas, to move faster, and where alternatively you need to slow down. Let's talk about this in more depth, and we're going to kick this off by showcasing the expert analysis. Now, obviously, there's a lot happening on these pages. Specifically, these are pages 534 and 535, and you can jump to those pages in your lesson book, of course. Now, what is happening within the passage itself? Meaning, what is the expert doing here? You can see me putting a big rectangular block around it. What are they doing? Circles, right? What's up with these circles? Why are those circles there? What's the point of them? Well, keywords, key concepts, maybe answers to questions, Katie, right? But important big ideas that are standing out, right? For many of you out there, you might even circle or box or underline or highlight, and please note, any of those are okay. If you prefer boxing to circling, fine. But a lot of you might do that sort of circling to keep yourself engaged, to stay focused in what you're reading. It makes you feel more comfortable. And while that's great, there is a very distinct downside to keyword notation. I'm going to showcase it on screen, and I'm going to do an extreme version of this, but I would wager a lot of you have done something along these lines before. What am I doing right now to this passage? And I know that at least some of you have totally experienced this. Right, way too many, right? I'm totally turning this passage into Swiss cheese. It's getting way too messy, too confusing. If you're circling everything, congratulations, you have just circled nothing, okay? So we need to be very careful about the amount that we mark. We want to mark big and important ideas, which begs the question, what constitutes a big and important idea? What do you think? How can we possibly know what sort of words we should be marking? Well, yes, in the most sort of simplistic way, we should be thinking about what are the questions going to ask us, right? So does that mean we should be reading the questions first so we know what they're going to ask us and then can mark keywords appropriately? I bring this up because this is often a big question, a big potential point of contention among test takers. What do you think? Should we read them all ahead? Well, here's the thing. If throughout your whole life of doing reading comprehension, you are used to reading the questions first, then that habit, because you're so used to it, could potentially be useful to you. But remember what we said, reading comp is the longest section that there is. How many of you, when you were doing the diagnostic, found yourself rereading as you were going through a paragraph? Like you would read a sentence or two and you'd be like, oh, wait, what the heck did I just read? Okay, I want you to imagine that happening while you're trying to remember all 7 of these questions that are attached to the passage. How do you think that would work out for you? That you're remembering all 7 questions as you're reading the content of the passage. That can be tough, right? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's impossible, right? Maybe there are a couple of questions that you don't need to keep in mind. Maybe instead you read the first paragraph and then you check all the questions to see if they happen. There are ways you can make this work. But the good news is, for the vast majority of students, you don't need to. And there's a very simple reason as to why. This is a standardized test. The test makers keep asking the same questions again and again and again. And this is where a lot of your answers to me previously came from, meaning when I said, what sort of words should we mark? A lot of you said, oh, we should mark opinions. We should mark main point. We should mark like purpose. Why did you say those things to me? Why did you say that we should mark opinion as we read? Why did you say to me we should mark main point as we read or purpose as we read? Because those are typical questions. Allison, exactly right. Very common for the test makers to say, what was the main point of the passage? Heck, you can even see that one right on page 534. That's question 9, asking what the main point is. Inference questions are often going to ask you what the author would agree with or disagree with. So if you're aware of what the questions are classically going to ask you about, and this is, yes, memorizing sort of general question categories, you don't need to read the specific questions ahead of time because you can already have a sense of what to focus on. We're going to give you some lists of keywords, and we're going to talk more about keywords and how to make sure you're marking the best ones for you. But suffice it to say for now, we want to mark some keywords, not too many, and we want to try to mark keywords that are going to help us answer known types of questions, which will normally be things like opinion, main point, that sort of thing. Okay, there's also marking that is happening beside the passage. Now, some of you even said to me that in the past you've done this where you've taken margin notes. Why would you do this? We just talked before about timing being really tough in reading comp. Why would you take valuable seconds, if not minutes, to write out info beside? Okay. I'm getting some interesting answers here. So a lot of you are saying to kind of rephrase or put what you are reading in your own words. And that is useful because that can help with your retention of what you've read. It can also help with your understanding. If you read a paragraph or even just a few sentences and pause and think about what you've read and think about it in such a way that you can write down a couple key ideas, that can really assist you just with your comprehension of the passage. Also, as a lot of you are saying, and this is huge, you want to be able to easily find information when you're doing questions. And I want to really pause and dig into this in more depth. How many of you, when you were taking the diagnostic, would read a question in the reading comp set and then try to remember where that was? Try to remember what the passage said about that. Okay, while that can work for a couple of questions, what should you be doing instead when you read a question in reading comp? Where should your eyes be going instead of up here? They should be going to the passage. Exactly right. And this can seem sort of strange or weird to some people, but this is an open book test. They don't give you the passage and then it vanishes. It is literally sitting there. Now, I know you might be thinking, but Jeff, going back and rereading takes time. Well, so does accessing your memory, and your memory may not be perfect. In fact, the test makers are very, very good at creating tempting answer choices that will sort of trigger something that you do remember reading, but then they'll distort it and end up fooling you with a wrong answer choice. If you know where to go back and research, then that can really help you solve the question. Now, when you're going back to research, do you want to have to skim the whole passage? And I'm sure some of you did this before. You're like, where was that in the passage? And you're like, up here at the top, going through the whole thing. Like, no, you do not want to have to go back and look at the entire passage. And that's why we want these notes, these labels, exactly right, Jessica, that will allow us to say, oh, that happened in paragraph 2, or that even happened at the beginning of paragraph 2, and that's where I'm going to go back and reread. So the point of these margin notes, the reason why it's worth it for us to take the time, is it helps with your comprehension, and perhaps even more importantly than that, it helps with the research step, where you're going back and rereading to solve questions correctly. What is the downside of this margin note taking? Because there's always a downside when we talk about circling keywords or making margin notes. It takes time. In addition, has anyone out there ever tried to make margin notes, but you didn't know what to write? Or conversely, you wrote too much and ended up with a novella beside the passage? Yeah, either of these two scenarios, these are of course both extremes, but either one can happen, where you've read something, you're like, oh, I don't really know how to sum it up. And then you're wasting time, right? Or, Jeremy, you could even write notes that end up not helping you, right? Who's done that, where you end up taking notes, but then when you move to answer the questions, you're not even using the notes that you created. In that case, well, then, yeah, you are wasting time. So we need to be very, very careful with the type and amount of margin note taking that you do. And it really is going to vary from passage to passage, okay? Like right here, you're seeing, a certain number of circles and a certain amount of note taking, and that's going to change based on the difficulty level of the passage. If the passage is easier, you're probably not going to need as much margin note taking because you just get the passage. If the passage is harder and more complex, you're probably going to need more margin note taking. So you've got to find a sweet spot and a sweet spot for each passage. One final thing with this, you all are different to a degree, meaning some of you can read a sentence or two and just remember it and really not need to write anything down. Whereas others of you out there, if you kept reading, you would totally forget the part that happened before. And a lot of this just has to do with practice that you've done with reading comprehension or other memorization activities in your life. I have good news for you. You do not need to memorize when it comes to reading comprehension, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't mention that you are different, and some of you individually will need more or less or certain words marked or certain phrases listed. We'll do our best today to show you a good rule of thumb to follow, but this is the part of the test that is really going to need you to practice to find what is the right amount for you. And another piece of good news is it's pretty easy to tell if you've done it right or not, because you're either going to be getting the questions right or not, and you're going to be noticing that you're road mapping, and the road map is what we call the circles and margin notes you made, whether or not that's helping you. So you can really look back after doing a passage and the questions associated with it and say, did my marks assist me, or was it really just a waste of time? But the more you work on this, the better you'll find what is right for you individually. With that said, let's jump into some more content that I have to talk with you about. The next thing I want to show you just real quick is there are 55 lines of text in this passage, all right? Are you going to get questions about all 55 lines of text? No, right? Like that's not going to happen. There's not 55 questions associated with this passage. So is every single part of this passage going to influence your score? No. There are parts that just aren't going to matter. What does this mean we should do? Well, when you're reading and you need to reread, and then that part doesn't show up in the questions, what just happened? Meaning, let's say you're reading paragraph 2, you reread it because you don't understand, and then not a single question asked about paragraph 2. You just wasted a bunch of time, okay? So ideally, you want to try to cut down on rereading as you go through. Now, I know a lot of you before were talking about rereading, right? That this could be a standard approach, but we really want to wait and reread when. When do you think it would be the perfect time for us to reread? Because we'll reread, but we'll do it. There it is, Bella, absolutely right. We will reread when a question asks us about that part. The reason I'm talking about this, everyone, is this is the big change in the way you should be reading. You do not want to read all 55 lines of this particular passage with equal weight. There's some parts of this passage that are going to matter more, and you're going to slow down in, and there's some parts of this passage that aren't going to matter as much, and you're going to want to speed up in. And whether you're slowing down or speeding up for all of it, we want to try to avoid rereading as much as possible. Sometimes we'll just need to reread because we didn't understand it. But overall, we want to avoid as much rereading as we can the first time through because we'll reread later. All right? Bella, excellent question. How do you think we could know where we should slow down in reading the passage versus where we could speed up? I love this question. Where do you think we would slow down? We're going to slow down whenever we get opinions. Exactly right, because opinions are questions. It's also a good idea to slow down in the beginning. Can anyone tell me why that is? Especially, near the end of the first paragraph or even the very beginning of the first paragraph. Why would you slow down in the beginning? Because, well, that's usually where we get the thesis statement. How many of you have written essays before? How many of you have had to write an essay about a particular topic? Oh, a million, right? All the time. In your first paragraph, you always put what the essay is going to be about, right? And knowing that will give us a sense of what's going to happen. So we're always going to slow down a little bit at the beginning so we know what the story is about, right? Then we're going to always slow down with opinion. And we should also slow down where else? What else do you think would be a good point to slow down based on the questions we've talked about, based on essays you've written? The end. Why do you naturally tell me that we should slow down at the end? And Bella, yes, we could also slow down at counterpoints because we normally get a conclusion at the end. Yeah. So really and truly, the experience you have had reading essays and writing essays can help you a great deal when it comes to reading, as long as you learn to divorce yourself from reading every word as if it has equal weight. Really and truly, slowing down and speeding up will be one of the biggest changes you'll be making in your approach. All right, that was a lot of information, so let's break it down a little bit more depth, and then actually let's start using it. So if you take a look at page 536, you will see the Kaplan method for reading comp. Now, I want you to go and take a peek at these later 4 steps. What do those remind you of? What does that sound like to you? Reading the question stem, researching, predicting, evaluating. That's logical reasoning. Exactly right. So a lot of this is going to be really, really familiar. But what we're going to focus a lot of today on is this first step, is reading strategically. Because, as I said, you have experience with reading comp. You have habits, and we want to show you those habits that need to change. Just like in logic games, where you shouldn't really worry too much about the questions until you've become skilled at creating the sketch, same in reading comp. You don't want to stress the questions in reading comp too much until you become strategic at reading. But don't get me wrong, we're totally going to do questions today. You're going to get the opportunity to do questions today. But know that the major thing we're going to be working on is this new way of reading. That's our goal. All right? With that said, let's break down those parts we just talked about on the previous slide. When you're reading, we're going to be keeping an eye out for keywords. As we said, we definitely care about author's main idea, so author opinion, and we also care about the overall structure of the passage. What this means is you really want to make sure you know what every paragraph is doing. Can anyone tell me why that is? Why should you know the point of each paragraph? How would that help you? Because, well, Rakeem, that will be our summary, right? If we can summarize each paragraph, then we'll know the point of that paragraph. at least usually. Aaron, it's also true that if we sum up a paragraph, we can predict what's going to happen in the rest of the passage. That's something we'll talk about as well. But primarily for answering questions. Exactly right. We want to be able to say, oh, paragraph 2 was about the author's counter-argument. So if a question asks me about the author's counter-argument, I'm going to go to paragraph 2. Remember, again, our initial read, our first time through the passage, we're not reading for all the details. We're reading for overall structure, so we can research as needed, and opinion. Okay, and if you think to the types of questions that you will get asked, this is really going to cover all the bases. Because either questions are going to ask you about opinion, and you've noticed opinion. They're going to give you line numbers, in which case just go to those line numbers, or they're going to ask you about something else. And if they ask you about something else, no matter what it is, as long as you know what every paragraph is doing, you can research that question effectively. Moving on, that roadmap. The roadmap will be your margin notes. Please realize that keywords, which is what you're circling, and the roadmap of margin notes, they're going to work in tandem with each other. So we don't want to, circle a particular keyword and then write, the exact same, keyword right beside the passage. It's not going to be, any good for you. But what we want to do instead is use these two things together, the circles and the note-taking, to, again, really sum up any opinions and the point of each paragraph to make our research for the questions as easy as possible. We also want to focus on the big picture. Now, all of these items can potentially show up in the very first paragraph, and the last two, purpose and main idea, will definitely show up at the end. This is, again, why we pause in the beginning, because the beginning gives us a sense of what the story is going to be about. And we also pause at the end, because that's where we definitely get purpose and main idea in the vast majority of cases, and questions are going to ask about those things. Now, I want to talk with you a little bit about the different sorts of topics that happen in reading comprehension. So I'm sure everyone, of course, remembers the diagnostic at least a little bit, and you might recall that in the reading comp section, you have 4 passages, and you're going to get one of each of these that you see listed here. Meaning you're going to get one humanities, which is like the arts, one social science, one natural science. Natural science is the one that students often don't like. It's jargon heavy. Don't get me wrong, some students love it, but that's one that kind of goes back and forth. And then law passages. Now, while knowing those 4 topics is nice, just to be aware that that's what the LSAT is generally going to test you on, it's not super useful in terms of giving you control over the passage. What is more useful is knowing the passage types. Because by knowing passage types, you can predict where the passage is going to go. Did anyone feel lost when you were reading the passages on the diagnostic test? Meaning you'd read a particular sentence or a paragraph and you'd say to yourself, why did the author bring that up? Or I don't really see how this relates to what happened before. Or man, I never would have expected that this would be the next thing that the author would mention. When you get lost, that often makes you reread, and that of course can lose you time, or you can just get frustrated with the passage or then have difficulty with those types of questions. So what can be very useful to do instead is to be aware of the common types of passages, because what this lets you do is predict. And through predicting, you can really take control of what is happening. All right, Steve, in terms of getting hung up on vocabulary, that's slightly different, but we can use other things we've been talking about to help with that. We can use context clues. We can use what's happening in the rest of the passage to give us a sense of what the purpose of that area was about. And we will talk about context clues in greater depth later in the session. Thanks for bringing that up. For each of these, I'm sure you've experienced them before, and you could tell me what would happen. This first one says theory, perspective, but this is also the same as getting like new technology. So like new tech, theory, perspective, those are all kind of in the same category. If you were writing an essay about a new theory or new technology that had just come out, what would you write about first? So again, imagine your English professor says, oh, I need you to write an essay about this new theory. What'd you kick off with? Okay, maybe some history associated with it. So like the background, sure, that could happen. What would happen after that? Well, then we probably learn what the theory is. So like, what is the theory? So maybe some background information about, what the previous theory was, the previous technology. Then we learn what the theory is. what would you do after that? So you say, okay, here's the new theory, here's the new technology. Then what? Probably opinions about it. Right? We give evidence associated with it, and this is normally going to go positive or negative, meaning we're going to say some good things as well as potentially some bad things about the theory. And this totally gets into the refutation I see people bringing up, the opinion I see people bringing up. Like, do people like this theory? Is the technology good? Is there something wrong with the technology? That sort of thing. So usually positive, negative, as well as just opinions in general. And at the very end, what do you think we might get? So the author tells us some good, some bad about the theory. How do you think it would end? How would you end your essay? Doesn't have to happen. But yeah, you could say your opinion at the end, or the author could say their opinion, like, this is a great theory that everyone should start to use, or this theory has definite problems that need to be remedied before we can start applying it. Okay? So this is one potential flow of this type of passage. But think about what it would mean if in just the first few sentences you could say to yourself, oh, this passage is introducing a new technology. I bet they'll tell me about the technology itself, probably tell me some good and bad, and then maybe the author will step in and let me know what they think. And then that happens. Seriously, everybody, how would that feel? If after the first few sentences you predicted the passage, you read the passage, and it's the same as your prediction. It makes it feel way more manageable. Exactly right. It gives you a sense of control. That is a win that you are getting before you're even doing any of the questions, right? Now, I know some of you might be thinking, but Jeff, what if I'm wrong? What if I come up with this prediction and then it does something completely out of left field? That's actually still good, because if you are surprised, you are more likely to remember and retain it. Meaning, if you are going in with an expectation and then the passage, goes against that expectation, that's going to stand out to you in your mind. Let's try a couple more. Let's say that there was a big event, and you're just going to see me split event and phenomenon here. And don't worry, I'm going to be sending you notes about all this in the recap email. But for the event, if you were writing about a landmark case that happened, like women's right to vote, how would you structure the essay about that? What do you think? Okay, so definitely some historical information, exactly right. Definitely some, again, background information you could initially be including. So like the lead up to the event. All right, recent events, lead up, exactly, background, okay? What happened before, right? So kind of before the event, if you will. Okay, what would you talk about after that? Right, so the lead up, the before, then what? So like, how did this case even come about? Then the event itself, right? So like the actual case, what took place, right? And then what do you think you would do after that? Right, the impact, exactly. So we get the before the event itself, and then what impact did it have? What was the fallout of the event? What was the future effect? That sort of thing. Right, what happened because of it, precisely. Again, this is a very classic structure if you're ever talking about any big event that took place in history. Okay, phenomenon. A phenomenon is like a mystery. And we see this happen oftentimes in like natural science passages. If there is a phenomenon, how would you structure your essay? What do you think? So, author proposes a mystery like the Earth has been having polarity reversals happen more frequently than it used to. How would that essay be structured? Okay, first probably what it is. Like, what is the phenomenon that is taking place? Amy, we might see the before, but usually a phenomenon passage is talking about something that is taking place, right? Like, here is this mystery that is happening. It's possible that it could bring up what took place before that event happened, right? But sometimes it does just start with you, with that sort of phenomenon, that mystery happening. Once we learn what it is, then we classically get explanations. Yep. And oftentimes the author will give a couple different explanations, meaning like maybe it's this, maybe it's that, or they could talk about people that have tried to explain it. Once we get a couple explanations, what do you think would happen next? And again, you can think about how you would write this. If you write, okay, here's this phenomenon that's taking place, here's what a couple of different scientists are saying is the explanation, and then potentially author's opinion again, like which one do they like the best? Or perhaps the author even proposes their own explanation instead, right? So when you get a phenomenon, you learn what it is, explanations, and then often an opinion associated with it. Good, good. I hope some of these are feeling familiar, either from tests you've taken with the LSAT, practice you've done, or even before you started studying for the LSAT. All right, biography. How would you structure an essay that's a biography? And I know you've seen and read and done many a biography. What do you think? Again, we can get that history, sort of that background information about the individual that this happened. So we can kind of learn the childhood, the early years of the particular artist, whether they're a dancer or musician or whatever, right? What else? So we learn like background. Then we would often learn what? Well, Rakeem, what do you think would be associated with the current state? Right, like what they are known for, like what did they do that was significant? What they did. Yeah. So we normally get some history about the person, then we learn what they did, right? And then what do you think would happen after that? Steve, exactly right. How do they score on the L's? In addition to writing novels. Right. Oftentimes impacts, right? So maybe some author opinion about it, or what impact their work, their creation had on other people. So this is a structure that you'll notice that is very, very similar to our event structure, right? There is another structure you can see happen, though, that I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. And this starts with critics. Who's read a passage like this, where the author brings up a particular artist and then talks about critics who are not a big fan of that novelist, of that dancer, of that artist, right? What does the author do after bringing up the critics? So the author will say, you know, at the time that this person was performing, a lot of critics said that they weren't incorporating enough political statements in their works. Then the author refutes, right? Exactly. Or we can think of that, the author defends the artist, right? And what happens after the author does that refutation, classically? So the author mentions critics, the author refutes them, right? Then we get evidence for the author's refutation. This is one of the few instances where you may not be getting a main idea at the end. Instead, you might be getting more of a main idea in the middle with that author refutation. So this is just another way that biographies can be done. Once again, everybody, if this is feeling like, you know, a lot of info, don't worry. It's all going to be in the recap email. This one is a long recap email because there's a lot we go over in reading comp. Last but not least, though, we do have debate. I know a lot of you might think that means that the author is debating, but the truth is the author can be bringing up their opinion in any of these. Obviously, we've written author opinion in a couple of them, but technically the author can say what they think anytime. Debate is actually where the author brings up two or more other parties that are arguing with each other. So how would you structure an essay if you had to talk about two groups that are currently fighting with each other? What would you do? Two groups that are having a debate. Okay, so you could start with what is the disagreement, right? So like whatever the disagreement is, right? Like what is it that they're fighting about, right? Then and I see a couple of you bringing up, what is the issue at hand? Shannon, Bella, Amy kind of bringing up this, what's that argument, right? Then, as Rakeem mentions, we would normally see each side. So we would see POV of 1, POV of 2, meaning like, what does the first group think? What does the second group think? And once we know both those sides, meaning we're seeing side 1 and seeing side 2, what do you think would happen at the end? What would you potentially write at the end? If you're like, okay, here's what they're fighting about. Here's what side 1 thinks. Here's what side 2 thinks. Right, the author could take a side. Notice the author doesn't have to, right? Again, anytime we're bringing up author opinion, they don't need to. Maybe the author even thinks they're both wrong, right? But the author could weigh in on those opinions. There is one last pattern that happens quite a lot. You've probably noticed it before. It's relatively simplistic, and it often happens as part of these others. And it's when you see a problem. If you read a passage and the author brings up that there is a problem, what do you think the author is going to end up doing? Well, and yeah, we could definitely get an opinion about it, but there's likely going to be a solution or a resolution. Bella, Ravneet, Shannon, Steve, great answers. Thank you so much. So this last one that you see me listing here, this is a really, really common one. And Amy, you're still right to talk about that opinion because the author will often have an opinion about the solution, right? But problem solution is a very standard pattern that we can see utilized in any of these types. Now, once again, I know looking at what's on screen, you might think, oh my goodness, am I supposed to memorize all this? Well, yeah, it would help you if you knew these over time. And that's why I hope you've been taking notes, and that's why I'm going to send them to you in the recap. But I hope you also notice that we primarily did this just me bringing up certain topics and you telling me what you thought would happen next if you were writing the essay. So when you're reading a particular passage, even if you can't say which type it is, even if you can't say, oh, this is an event, I bet that if you put your essay hat on, you say to yourself, well, if I was writing about this topic that the first few sentences is introducing, this is what I would write. That can give you a sense of where the passage is going to go. And if you know where it's going to go, it's way less likely that you're going to get lost, and you're also going to be much more confident about your read of it. So in terms of approaching the passage, in terms of reading strategically, keywords, margin notes, keeping an eye on passage types for predictive reading, and then also figuring out that purpose and main idea at the end, because that's going to lead to points. I'm going to show you just a little bit more about these things, and then we're going to jump in and do it. The little bit more I'm referring to is right on page 538. You do have a list of classic keyword categories. Now, do you think you should be circling every single one of these keywords that you encounter in a passage? What do you think? No. Remember when I showed you that Swiss cheese before? If you circled every single word that was on this page, that would be too much. The keywords we're showing you here are things that are meant to assist with your read. Yes, you should be marking opinion keywords when you see them, and we'll talk more in depth about that when we do the passage. And yes, certain contrast words can be useful for you, but a lot of these others are just useful to take note of. For example, when you see a continuation word, just like in logical reasoning, that means you're getting more of the same. And that's useful just in terms of understanding the structure of the story that passage is giving you. So page 538 just has a nice list of keywords, something to be aware of. Again, you're not going to be marking all of them. In case previously you were wondering what the definitions of things like topic, scope, purpose, and main idea are, you can have them all right here. In addition, please realize that, as I said before, you're going to learn the topic and scope in the beginning, the very first paragraph. Sometimes you will also learn the purpose and main idea in the beginning, but you will definitely learn the purpose and main idea at the end. We care about all of this, and we care about all of it because the topic and the scope is what is going to ground you in the passage. It's what's going to let you say, if I was writing an essay about this, what would it be? And then predict. So we want to take the time to know the topic and scope because that will let us predict where the passage is going to go. That's super useful. We care about knowing the purpose and main idea because that's what questions are going to ask us about, and that's going to give us points. All right? So With that in mind, let's take a look at a passage. As you can expect, we are going to do this first passage together. It's going to be teamwork so we can really showcase how to do all of this stuff we've been talking about. Let's make it very, very simple to start. We're going to look at one sentence, and you're going to tell me what keywords you notice. So sentence one, what keywords do you see? Go ahead and let me know. Okay, I'm hearing vital. Okay, hearing but. Okay, I'm hearing often. I'm hearing law. I'm hearing a lot of words. Now, what would happen if we marked all of those? What do you think? What would take place? And I'll use a highlighter so it can really pop out the page, make it easy for you all to see it. And so you know you can use a highlighter on test day. Just don't press too hard. You don't want to go through the pages. But if we say vital, but often law. I mean, it is only one sentence, right? But that is a lot of marks next to each other. I'll tell you right now that really vital and too little are some of the most important words you're getting right here. Why? Why are those really critical? Whether you mark them or not, why should everybody here be slowing down when they see the word vital as well as too little? Because that's opinion. Exactly right. Vital is an opinion word. Too little, that is opinion language, right? We care about opinion because the test creators care about opinion in their questions. Now, do you need to know what the author thinks is vital? Do you need to know what the author thinks is too little? Let me know. Well, just so you don't get lost, yes, that would be a good idea. Whenever we're talking about opinion, you should at least have a basic understanding. I'm not saying you need to know every single little nuance, but generally speaking, you should know what it is that the author seems to like. What is it that the author thinks is vital? What does the author believe is really important? Okay. The text of laws, which is called what? There's a name for this type of law. Right, the understanding of statutory law. Okay, so should we make a margin note that says, the author thinks that statutory law is very important? Is that what our margin note should be saying? Would that be a nice, effective, efficient margin note? Yeah, that's a lot. That's a mouthful, okay? That's what all of you should know in your head, right? Everybody here, because this is opinion, and because questions ask about opinion, everyone here should know the author thinks statutory law is important. But we don't need that many words in order to remind ourselves of this idea. And as I said before, some of you out there can just remember this, and you may not even need to write anything, but we're going to be writing stuff to play it safe. So tell me, please, how could we really shorthand this? I'm seeing a couple. I'm seeing some like stat law arrow vital. I'm seeing another of like stat law equals important, right? You know, there are a lot of different ways that we could write this. I will tell you that it's useful to know author. Why do you think it's helpful for us to just remind ourselves that this is something that the author believes, as opposed to somebody else? There could be multiple opinions, right? What if we get author and critic and experts, and then questions are asking about those different ones? Now, don't get me wrong, if a passage only has author, then marking author is not as important, right? And there are different ways you can mark author. You'll notice that Hannah, myself, we put AU here. This isn't the only way, though. You could use stars. You can use just A for author. There's multiple ways to mark, but you will see me mark AU for author opinion here. Now, you also notice that Hannah, I did something symbolic, and that is something you can do. You can use items like a positive, like a plus sign, a smiley face. So that way you can quickly say, oh, the author has a positive reaction to stat law. Now, are there other marks in there? Are there different things you could do? Could you put an equal sign? Could you put, a colon? Sure. But as long as you know the author has a favorable opinion towards statutory law, you're good. This is the part where personal preference does matter, because you need to write a shorthand piece in such a way that you know what it means. It's not like logic games where you can just say, okay, whenever you see ... that instantly tells you that there's an unknown amount of space between those two entities, and that's what you're going to use from now until forever, right? Here, we could say that, yes, always use AU to mean author, and we'd say always use plus to mean a positive opinion, as long as you like those things. But you've got to make sure that you're writing enough to know what it means. Obviously, I'm spending a little bit of time here, but that's because many students struggle with knowing how to write out margin notes, and we want to be as efficient as possible. Okay, next part is too little. What does the author believe is too little? What is the author not a fan of? Okay, so the author thinks writes. So author believes that law schools are not giving enough attention to statutory law. Again, this is what you should be thinking in your head. Like, the author thinks that law schools aren't getting enough attention, or not giving enough attention to statutory law practice. Obviously, that is way too much to write, though. How can you boil it down? Amy's just like, no. And I agree. I mean, you shouldn't be writing all that. That's just what you're thinking in your head. How should you boil it down? Okay. Now, we do need to be careful about the format that you're writing in, okay? If we wrote out law school, for example, law school negative stat law, what would this mean according to the shorthanding scheme we've been using so far? Law school negative stat law. What would that indicate? I'm not saying you can't use it. You just got to be careful, right? This would mean that law schools don't necessarily like statutory law. Is that what we've learned? Not necessarily, right? We've learned that the author thinks that law schools are not giving enough attention to statutory law. And I know some of you might be thinking, Jeff, what I was saying was, notice the tilde, I was saying law schools are not doing enough statutory law. And that's fine. As long as your shorthand tells you that long sentence that I wrote out, you can abbreviate it however you want. Just keeping with the same format we've been using, though, since this is still author opinion, you're going to see me say that the author has a negative view of the law schools. The author is not happy with the way the law schools are operating. Why is the author not happy? Well, then we would go back and read, oh, because the law school is not giving enough attention to statutory law. Now, once you get used to doing this, this can all happen very, very quickly, all right? But please note that this is a part of the passage we should be slowing down on, because this is opinion. And remember, too, this is also the beginning, based on the types we talked about. Where do you think this essay is going to go? If the author is saying, I like statutory law and law schools aren't doing enough of it. We've only got the first paragraph up on screen, but I bet you can tell me exactly what is going to happen in this passage. Yeah, I bet the author is going to talk about why law schools should be teaching statutory law. Perhaps to convince the reader of that, the author will list some benefits of statutory law. Aaron, exactly right. Jeremy, some pros of statutory law. Perhaps the author could give us some cons of statutory law. Maybe after giving those cons, what do you think the author would do? If the author said, you know, like, while it's true that there's this negative about statutory law, what do you think the author would then do with it? The author would then refute it, right? So Jeremy, you're totally right to say the author could bring up something negative, but based on this beginning, we would expect the author to be doing that just to kind of get rid of a potential weakness, right? Right, refute the cons, Katie, exactly. Shannon, great structure there. Nina, Rakeem, yes, exactly. Steve, Bella, right as well. So you just told me what this passage is likely about just from reading the very beginning of this. I'll be interested to see how you feel once we get through the rest of it. All right, moving on to sentence 2. Do you notice any big keywords here that we should be slowing down to pay attention to? Let me know. Well, yeah. In terms of opinion, and remember we said opinion's the main thing. In terms of the opinion, there's not really a lot going on here. The only part that's there is when it talks about can give a law student the impression. And what do you think this language of impression is setting up, everybody? That impression is probably wrong, right? But does the author say that in this paragraph? Does the author end up saying this impression is incorrect? No, so while we're getting a little bit of setup, we don't get any definitive opinion happening here. Instead, this whole chunk, the whole rest of the paragraph is just factual, right? Walter, exactly, Meredith, right? It's implied, and we have an expectation of what's going to happen next because of it. So this area is just a bunch of facts. And a lot of students aren't necessarily sure what to do when they read a section with facts, meaning, you know, what sort of margin notes that they might write. The best thing to do is, if you're not getting opinion, is to just say to yourself, what is this part about? If we simply label it as being about that thing, then if a question asks us about it, we can go back to it. But notice this area, this latter 2/3, we should be moving very quickly through this, meaning we're not reading all these words with a ton of weight because we're not seeing opinion. What is this section about? Just overall, what is discussed here? Well, it's just the topic of this part. Katie, you're absolutely on the right track. This is what is taught in where? Past cases is what they're teaching, right? There we go. It's a law school. Yep, exactly. So this is just info of law schools. This is like what law schools teach. So law school info. If you wanted to write law school teach cases or law school teach case law, you could, all right? But overall, you just want to know this is what law schools are currently doing. This is what they are teaching. If a question asks us about what they're teaching, we will go back and reread. Do you need to memorize every single little fact about what law schools are currently doing? No, not at all. This is the part you want to let go, all right? So notice, for this part, in the beginning, we're kind of moving slowly, thinking about it, and boom, we're speeding up through this next part. And we're speeding up through that next part because we're not getting a lot of opinion. Okay, you all have actually already told me where you think this passage is going to go. But please note, if you hadn't made a prediction based on your initial read of the passage yet, now is when you would do it. So whenever you finish reading a paragraph, you can always say to yourself, where do I think this passage is going to go? And this is really good to do after the very first few sentences or the first paragraph, because that gives you a sense of what the rest of the passage is about. And as I said before, it gives you control. Okay, paragraph 2. What happens? What do you notice in terms of key words in the very first sentence? However, boom, right now, considering the author was just talking about law schools and what they currently do, are you shocked to see the author give us a however? Is that surprising to you know, right? I'm sure you expected this, okay? So what is this part about? Because notice this is the author contrasting something, so we should be slowing down. What is this? Aaron, it is about reality, and how does reality relate to this? Bella, yeah, it gets back to why what law schools are doing isn't the best. In other words, what we're seeing here is law schools, what they're teaching, how does it relate to reality? What law schools are teaching as well. What's the wrong focus because? Why? Meredith, exactly right. The reason why this sentence is here, the reason why the author is contrasting is to show support that the law schools are not teaching the right thing. Aaron, exactly, there's a gap brought up here, and this gap is between what law schools are teaching and a reality, right? In other words, imagine, if you will, everybody, if you spent all this time and effort in law school and then you became a practicing lawyer and what you learned in law school didn't apply. How would that make you feel? You spent hours and thousands upon thousands of dollars, right? Right. I mean, maybe this is actually paralleling some reality. Keep in mind, these are real passages. Right? These were not written by LSAT. These were excerpted from various publications. So this is a real thing. But the point here is that if we were to sum it up, law schools are not matching up. That does not equal reality. Notice again, we're slowing down here because this is the author contrasting. What do you notice happen in the very next sentence? For example, what should you do the second you see this example? You should, well, one, mark it. And we're not saying you always need to mark examples, but this one's placed very nicely for us to mark it. Be like, okay, initially we're getting the author contrasting. Now we're getting an example. And then do what? Brianna, yes. Go faster. Skip it. Shani, yes. Now we're not going to just fully skip every single word, all right? But we are definitely going to speed through this area. And here's why. The chances that the test makers are going to ask us a question about the example are pretty darn slim. Plus, I bet you can already tell me what this is going to be an example of. Go and tell me, everyone. Let me know in the chat. What is this going to be an example of without even reading it? Bill, I'm sure we'll end up relating back to statutory law. But even more specifically, what did the author just say? Right, the author just said that much of the practice of law school does not depend on the kind of painstaking analysis cases that is performed in law school. Right, the author is going to show an example of where this law school training of case law doesn't necessarily relate to reality. Right, so we don't even need to read this example in depth to know what it's about. If you were to make some sort of margin up aside, you could say this is an example of this point up here. Please note, this part you see me marking is not something you're doing on test day. I'm just visually showing where you slow down versus speed up. Now, the main thing we should be reading for as we're speeding through this example is just where does it end? How long does this example go for? Let me know in the chat, everybody. Where does this example stop? It goes for a bit. Yeah, it actually goes all the way down to this word but. Now, I know speed reading through all of that content can stress some of you out. I know some of you might be thinking, but Jeff, what if they ask me about something related to the example? If they ask you something related to the example, you'll go back and reread it. Remember, we want to do our rereading when a question makes it worth our while to do so, but the chances are slim that they're going to. Okay, why would you be slowing down again here at the end part? What is it about that end part that makes you go, oh, this looks important? What about it looks important? Well, what's the opinion? What language says opinion to you? Well, part of it is the but, right? But please note that not every single contrast word is going to matter for you. Previously, it was really nice because we got what law schools were doing, and the author says, however. But here, yeah, it says statutes are not always so obvious. Now, wait a second. On the surface, what does that sound like? Statutes are not always so obvious. Does that sound like a good thing, or does that sound like a bad thing? Well, it seems like it make it harder to use, right? So that sounds like it's a negative thing. So why would the author say, hey, statutes are actually not too obvious? Why is the author saying that? Shannon, Bella, on the right track. The author is saying they're not obvious, and that is why, right? That is a reason, that is one reason why it's an essential skill for law students to learn. So they're tough, but that's why you should learn them, okay? So it's still supporting, meaning exactly right. Now, I want to show you something about highlights. There are a lot of highlights that are happening for this particular part. You do not necessarily need to make all of these highlights. However, everyone here should be walking away from paragraph 2 saying, oh, statutes are kind of tricky to learn. That's why they should be taught in law schools. That's what you need to know. So you can either mark those words, because this particular sentence does a really nice job of summing up those concepts for us, or you could make a margin note of that same information. Now, I want to talk with you about the reality of highlighting. Okay, so let's imagine that we had the very next paragraph right underneath it, which of course you will have on test day. And let's say that there was something you wanted to highlight right here at the very beginning of the next paragraph. How is this looking to have highlights right next to each other? And remember, highlights are the same as underlines, boxes, circles. It doesn't matter what you're doing. How would it look if you've got marks right next to each other? Could be confusing, right? So what you can end up doing is alternating between highlights and margin notes, right? So that way you can easily differentiate. So if we were to highlight the amount we are doing here, for the next part, we would need to wait to do another highlight or circle or underline or box. Instead, we would just use margin notes. It just so happens that the wording at the end of this particular paragraph is very clear-cut and does a nice job of summing up the information for us. That said, I always want you working on your ability to create margin notes. So tell me, please, how could you sum up in your own words what is happening at the end of this paragraph? Let me know, please. So if instead of highlighting, you made a margin note, what would you say? Okay. Probably want to jump that author in there, that AU, just because it does say essential skill, right? So author says statutes are not obvious or are hard, right? So they're an essential skill, right? So important. So they should be what? Again, the whole reason of saying that they're hard, they're challenging, is to support the notion that they should be what? That they should be taught, right? So author is basically saying stats are not obvious, so teach, right? Again, many, many different ways you could list this particular shorthand. As I said, whether you have it highlighted, whether you have it as a margin note, or whether you've got some of each, doesn't matter. As long as you're walking away from this paragraph knowing that core concept when you leave, all right? Meredith, Amy, Katie, Bella, Mark, Haley, all giving me Aaron, great answers in there. And I know Aaron was talking about the extra highlights, but I appreciate all the answers that everyone's been giving me throughout. Okay, where do you think the author is going to go next? Considering the author has given some support for why statutes should be taught, and I will tell you that there are 4 paragraphs in this passage, and we're moving on to 3. What do you think the author is going to do? Right, since we have another body paragraph, as they're called, perhaps just additional support, right? Could be cons, though, maybe something bad, and then refute. What happens here? What do you notice? The very first sentence. More support, right? Now, notice if you've got the previous line highlighted, you wouldn't be highlighting here. If you didn't have the previous line highlighted, you could just highlight, another skill synthesis. So either way, what I'm going to do is do both. That way you can have either one. And you could just say, more support equals synthesis. Now, why do you see me talking about synthesis? Both as potentially a highlight or margin note. Again, either one that you would do. Please note you'd only do one of these. You don't need both. Why synthesis? Why should you notice that? Well, maybe it would be a question, but what does the opening sentence of a paragraph normally tell you? What the topic of that paragraph is going to be, right? This paragraph is going to be about synthesis, right? So if a question asks you about synthesis, this is the paragraph you're going to go back and reread, okay? So once again, we have that another skill synthesis with more support. What happens in sentence 2? Let me see. Yeah, this is going back to law school, right? Law professors. This is a moment where a lot of students can get lost. They can wonder, why is the author bringing up law school again? What do you think that would be? Why would the author ever mention what law school is doing? Because notice it says law professors work hard developing their students' ability. Why would the author ever bring that up? To show, well, to show that they're doing it, what? Right, to do it wrong and then follow up with a critique. Right, exactly. They're going to show, or the author is going to show something that law schools are doing wrong to then talk about how it should be done. So what are law schools doing wrong in the second sentence? What do we learn that's, incorrect for them? And some of you had already brought this idea up. We're basically learning law schools. So the author has basically a negative view, or you could just say law schools are not what? Right, well, they don't have synthesis, right? Law schools don't have synthesis because they're looking at particular cases instead of the interrelations among laws, right? So the author is saying that statutory law would help with synthesis. Law schools don't have synthesis. Then what happens in the next? So sentence 3. Right, so going against what law schools are doing, right, this really explains to us how this focus on statutes creates synthesis. Bell, exactly right. This is talking about what statutes are doing. And Meredith, exactly right. Statutes can help with synthesis. How long does that idea get talked about in the rest of the passage? Is it one line and then something else? 2 lines, something else? How does it go? It's really the rest of the paragraph, Shannon. Rakeem, absolutely right. All of the rest of this is just showing statutes help with synthesis. Now, obviously, if a question asks us about this concept, we can reread it in more depth, right? And what are some words that you might normally want to mark as you're reading this? What are some words that as you read, the latter half of this paragraph that might pop to you? Right, you might see, oh, we're contrasting what law schools were previously saying. That's fine if you want to have that marked, as you see, okay, we were saying that law schools don't have synthesis, and here's what it would be like if we did have synthesis, right? And then at the end, we get the author saying it's especially important. Why does the author say it's especially important? Because let's be honest with each other, we already know that the author likes statutory law, so how is this different than normal? It says especially important because students intend to specialize, right? And the reason I'm talking about this in a little bit more depth is that you want to be careful of repetition. And I mean this in all ways. For example, on test day, should you both highlight another skill is synthesis and write more support equals synthesis? Should you do both of those things on test day? No. I'm just showing you both so you could do either one you want to do. You want to avoid repetition. And it's the same idea down below. Do we know from this passage that the author thinks including statutory law training is important? From what we've read so far, is that something we know? Yeah. So if you just highlight especially important, that's not doing anything for you, right? We already know the author thinks that. The only value in marking that especially important would be what? What is the only way that could be useful to us? Right, if we link it to something that is new, right? And here, the author isn't just saying especially important because statutory law is awesome, and that's it, right? The author is saying that apparently statutory law and synthesis can actually help with specialization. So that would be the only reason to make that mark. And please note, if there wasn't something new, if the author's like, this is another reason why statutory law should be, done, you wouldn't even need to mark that because that's a concept you're already aware of. In this way, you can really cut down on the amount of marks you're doing, streamline your approach. I also hope you see, everybody, how we're able to speed up and slow down. Tell me real quick, everyone, where here would you be slowing down? What parts of this paragraph would you be pausing a little bit to read carefully? Right at the beginning, a little bit, sure thing. Right, that beginning sentence, just to make sure we're clear what the heck this paragraph is about, right? We're like, oh, okay, I know now this paragraph is going to be about synthesis, right? And then, yeah, a little bit at the end, right? Maybe just a little bit down here, yep. And go really fast through this middle part, right? You'd see the law schools and be like, okay, author's bringing up law schools because they're doing something wrong. What is it? Oh, yeah, no synthesis. Start reading the next part. Okay, now the author's talking about synthesis, bunch about synthesis. Oh, especially important because specialization. Done, right? You get to burn through that middle section. And by changing gears between when you're moving slowly and when you're speeding up, that's what's going to give you time. All right, last paragraph, what do you think it's going to be about? That's right, I'm having you predict with each just so you can get used to doing it. What do you think this last paragraph is going to focus on? Because it's the final one. Right, maybe just a summary of what's taken place, right? As we can see, law schools should be teaching statutory law, right? Something like that, right? Or maybe a con. As we take a look, what do you notice happening right away? Like immediately. A con. Right? So for those of you that were talking before, Jeremy, about there potentially being that negative that happened previously, boom, here you go. One possible argument against. Okay, now, why would the author bring up this argument against? What's the point of them doing this? Would be to refute it, to shoot it down. So we're just, waiting for that to happen. However, do you think we should know what the argument against is? Do you think we should be aware of it? Probably, because why? Well, one, overall, it should hopefully end up making the author's argument stronger, but a question could definitely ask us, right? Like, what would be a negative about statutory law training? So go and tell me, everybody, what is the negative? What's the bad thing about statutory law? Right, exactly. So the argument against is that stats vary by region. Now, I want you to notice something we're doing here. Now, Bella, we talked about the hard to master in paragraph 2, right? But notice in this particular one, we're talking more about the variance. Now, it is true that the mastery of a set of statutes is discussed, but it's just saying that it would not be applicable. So in terms of this particular part, the problem is varying region by region. Now, I know you might be saying, hey, Jeff, why didn't you write like a stat, negative, stats vary by region? Remember we talked about that once you get better, right? We're showing you sort of stages of marking. Once you get better, you should be using your keyword marks in tandem with this. So when you go back and read this part, you would say, oh, here's where there's an argument against. Well, the core topic of this passage was statutory law, so it would be an argument against statutory law, and the argument against. The bad thing is that stats vary region by region. Now, we're not saying that you have to get to that point just yet. But that's what's going to happen in an ideal world. You can use the words you marked in the passage plus your margin notes, and that'll give you a real strong sense of what's happening in that area. Moving onward to our next sentence, what do you notice? What's happening? Oh, the author actually concedes. Yeah, the author validates the argument against by using what words? Mina, thank you so much. The sum truth, right? Author admits, author concedes ground. If you've never heard a concession before, this is like when you're arguing with a significant other and you're like, listen, I see your point, I get where you're coming from, and then what happens right after that when you're arguing with your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, your husband, right? But you're totally wrong and I'm right. Right, exactly. So this is an author concession, and we're just waiting for the author to then say they're wrong. Now, while we definitely should have slowed down during this initial part because we're like, oh, interesting, argument against, what should we be doing during this author concession? What do you think? Well, for one thing, yes, we are looking for where the author turns it around, like how is the author going to refute? And it also depends what happens here. If the author brings up a new negative, slow down. Okay, so if the author brings up another negative associated with statutory law besides the fact that they vary by region, we should take note of that. If the author just basically says the same thing again, we should be burning right through it. Okay, go ahead and read this next part and tell me, where do we get the author turning it around and saying why statutory law is still great? Well, which buts? Because notice we get this but right here that says, but for schools that are nationally oriented, right? Not this one, because notice it says this could seem to be an inappropriate investment. So we're still saying bad stuff here, right? Okay, down here it says, but while the knowledge of a particular region's statutory law is not generally transferable to other regions, is that good? Is that a good thing? That the knowledge is not transferable? Where's the good thing? We're still not there. There we go. It's after the comma. Boom. That's where it is. The skills acquired in mastering a particular set of statutes are. So even though stats vary region by region, the skills transfer. So that's the positive. And you could even write that out for yourself. Positive. Skills transfer. All right. And what does the author end up saying at the end that we're not surprised to read at all? The author, what? Right. The author is still saying that it's an important undertaking, right? As we'd said before, you would not want to say important undertaking there because that's like sort of two separate ideas. Instead, we would recommend you marking one of them in the sidelines. Again, the choice is yours. You could say, stat positive because skills transfer, or just skills transfer and that's good. So you could mark it that way. And you could say that the author is still very much behind stat law. So again, a couple ways you could be marking it in the passage, ways you could also be doing it in the margin. That choice really is yours, whichever you feel more comfortable with. Now, did the author bring up any sort of new ideas in the author's concession? Was there some other kind of like big, interesting negative associated with statutory law? We're just talking about reading speed here. No, it's really just still the idea that they vary region by region, and that could be a bad thing. So all of this you should be burning through and then slowing down when you get to the second part. Of saying like, oh yeah, author says positive skills do transfer, and the author is still very much in support of statutory law. Call it a day. So if we go back to each of these paragraphs, I hope you will notice that the parts we're slowing down on are usually going to be about opinion, and they're not massive. Generally speaking. In fact, they are a relatively small portion of the passage, perhaps a third or so in this particular case. Now, that number isn't always going to be set in stone, but what I hope it shows you is that you really can be reading a lot of the words, a lot of the sentences in these passages faster than you might think. Now, obviously, you don't want to be reading so fast you are losing comprehension, but learning how to speed up and slow down, that's the key, and that's something we'll be letting you try on your own later today. Before that, though, we do have a couple things to do. The first one on the list is let you take a break. That's right. You've been doing reading comp for over an hour and a half, so it's definitely time for you to have a breather. When we return, we're going to talk about the types of questions that happen in reading comprehension. We're going to go through the questions associated with these passages. I'm sorry, this passage. So you'll get to see how that works. And then after that, you're going to get to try a passage on your own. As always, everybody, I'm going to be hanging out at the start of break. So if there is anything on your mind, something you'd like me to go back to or clarify, I am more than happy to answer that for you. Just let me know in the chat. Otherwise, enjoy the break. You've totally earned it. And I will see you again in 8 minutes. Time for the questions. Speaking of questions, anything for me? Anything on your mind you're curious about? I know Hannah's already done an amazing job of answering questions on the side, but if you got some, let me know. Going once, twice. All right. I'm not seeing any typing. I'm not seeing any questions. That's okay. Enjoy the break. Relax. Grab a bite to eat. Get some coffee. When we return, it'll be question time. See you then. Reading the passage. At the end of the reading a passage, you'd always want to pause and say to yourself, what is the purpose? And what is the main point? Why do you think we would do that? Why would we, after we finish reading any reading comp passage on the LSAT, want to stop and say, what's the purpose? What's the main point? What's that main idea? Because we're probably going to get questions about it, Katie, absolutely right. So we're going to be doing that. We're just going to be doing that after we go through the question types because I want it to be fresh in your head. But please note that at the very end of reading the passage, that is an excellent thing to do just to prepare yourself. All right? And Aaron, yes, exactly right, to prep for the questions. So speaking of the questions, we're going to jump just a little bit in your book because I want you to get to see a full list of the different types of questions that exist on the LSAT. So the same list is actually located on your purple and white strategy sheet, but go ahead and flip to page 581. Let me know in chat when you were on page 581. So that way you can go through the different types of questions with me, and then we'll be doing the ones associated with this passage. Just gonna give a few more moments. Again, page 581. Welcome back from break. By telling me you're on the appropriate page, I know that you're not only back, but also ready to go. All right, good, good. I'm seeing most of you say that you are here, so I'm going to go ahead and kick off. So, first type of question that we're going to talk with you about is also the first type of question you'll normally get associated with a passage, and that is global. Global questions are named such because they ask about the big picture. They ask things like, what's the main point? What's the purpose? What's the organization? Organization just means what's each paragraph about. All right? Your job in these types of questions is to think about the big picture, to ask yourself what's the purpose and what's the main idea. And that's why we pause after reading the passage to do those things, so that way we're ready to go. Also, your roadmap can be very useful. If they ask you what the organization of the passage is, your roadmap should already show you paragraph by paragraph what is taking place. Detail questions. I want you to add a little something for me here. Write in, find a detail. I say this because a lot of students, when they hear the name detail, they think of line numbers, right? And we definitely get questions in reading comp that give us line numbers. But generally speaking, that's not what a detail question is. Because if a question told you to go to line 6, is the right answer going to be exactly what line 6 says? Go ahead and tell me in the chat below. Question says, go to line 6. Is the right answer word for word the same as line 6? No, right? That would usually be too easy. Normally it's going to be about the content around it, synonyms, that type of thing, okay? The right answers to detail questions, though, often are word for word the same as the passage. So they're not going to give you the line number because that would make it too simple. Instead, they're going to give you a clue, and it's your job to go find the detail based on the clue. You'll know you're doing a detailed question when you see language like according to the passage states, the author mentions. Notice how those are very, very concrete. They're saying this is something that definitely happened in the passage. Now, they're also going to give you a clue, usually, meaning they'll give you some words that will give you a sense of where to go read. And in order to read the right parts, you're going to be using your roadmap, meaning you're going to say, oh, this clue sounds like it happened in paragraph 2. So I'm going to go reread paragraph 2 and then find an answer that matches what I just reread. The most common type of question in reading comp, and for many students the hardest, is inference. I have good news for you, though. Sometimes these are difficult, but sometimes they're not too bad. And notice that this is the type of question that asks us about opinion. We spent tons of time finding opinion in that passage, so we would be ready for these sorts of questions. Notice that inference is a bit more up in the air, implies, suggests, instead of saying it definitely was stated. So inference questions are generally not as concrete as detail questions. What that means for you is sometimes the right answer is word for word the same as the passage, but more often than not, the right answer to an inference question will be synonyms or a combination of concepts. As we just talked about, you'll be going to your roadmap, finding that opinion in many cases, in other words, researching clues. Please note, if you get an inference question or a detail question that does not give you any clues, that is a really, really good question to skip. In fact, I'm sure a lot of you out there have seen a question that says the passage supports, and then that's it. It does not provide you with any sort of clues whatsoever. You would literally need to read each answer choice and go back and reread the passage in many cases to solve it, and that is way too time consuming. So just like in all sections, we will skip as is needed in the reading comp question set. Two remaining types are logic function and logical reasoning. Logic function first is classically going to ask you about a word, a phrase, or a paragraph. Really, everybody, logic function is just the same as role of a statement. Who remembers role of a statement from our LR1 class lesson, where they gave you a phrase and you had to say what that phrase was, do the conclusions, the evidence? It's really the same thing here. They're going to give you a word or a phrase or a paragraph, and they're going to say, hey, what is this doing in the passage as a whole? All right? Associated with that passage, and then if it's still hard, then you'd skip it entirely, only coming back to it at the end of the section if time allowed. Okay? And the reason we do that, everyone, is in reading comp, just like logic games, the more questions you answer associated with a passage, the more knowledgeable you become about that passage, the more rereading you're doing, right? So a question that was initially hard for you in a reading comp passage, after you've answered 3, 4, 5 questions, that one might be easier now. So when you skip, you're just skipping initially and then circling back to it. You heard me mention that logical reasoning is the final type. Now, technically, any type of logical reasoning question could show up in the reading comp section, but usually it's going to be strengthen or weaken, and that's what supports and undermines refers to. If they ever ask you to strengthen or weaken the author, that's actually a really good thing because that's similar to the main point. Because if you strengthen the author, you're strengthening their main point. If you weaken the author, you're weakening the main point. So those can be some nice questions that are similar to global. Principal, these are questions we'll be covering in greater depth in future class lessons. And analogous, that's actually a type we already covered. We covered analogous in LR1. Can anyone tell me what analogous would be the same as? You're finding an answer. That is parallel, Aaron, exactly right. So analogous just means a parallel reasoning question. As you saw in our LR1 lesson, parallel reasoning questions can be time consuming. Obviously in LR, we've got that characterization of conclusion trick, which can work nicely. We don't really have that same trick in reading comp, so a lot of students will wait on parallel reasoning. Though I will tell you that on reading comp, you've already read the first half, meaning it's going to be your job to find an answer that's parallel to something you've already read. So in some cases, parallel reasoning and reading comp isn't too bad. Please note that you will attack these questions, relatively speaking, using the same approach that you normally would. The only exception to this is parallel reasoning because, as I said, the characterization of conclusion technique doesn't carry over from LR. But all the others, same LR strategy. So the better you get at strengthen and weaken in our future class lessons, the better you get at principle in our future class lessons, the better you'll get at them in reading comp as well. Double bang for your buck. All right, with that said, we're now going to bounce back to the passage we had read and talk about that purpose and main idea. Please note on test day, you're not going to write out the purpose and main idea, but you should think of them. Just like on test day, you should be thinking of SEAL when you're doing a logic game. The purpose is classically going to be either to argue or to inform. Argue is if the author has a lot of opinion present. Inform is if it's just more factual. Now, there can be passages that have some of both, but honestly, if there's any opinion, usually that's going to lead toward the argue side. So which would you say this passage is doing? Does the author have an agenda that they are arguing for, or is this passage just giving you a bunch of facts? And either one can happen. The author does have a pretty darn clear-cut agenda here, right? Basically saying law schools are not, teaching enough of this and then, right? So the author has an argument. Now, the main point is going to be whatever that argument is or whatever that information is. So what is the author's argument, everybody? What is the author arguing for? I gave you the beginning, but definitely not the end. What does the author think? Well, statutes, statutory law, should be taught. Taught what? Taught more, exactly right. Because remember, notice the author said they were getting too little attention. It's not like the author told us that they were never being taught at all. Basically, statutory law should be taught more in law schools. And of course, the reason why is all the benefits that the author lists. But that's the author's main point. So if you figure out the purpose of argue to inform, then you can figure out the main point. Because if it's argument, it's whatever the author is arguing for. If it's informative, it's whatever the author is giving you information about. Now, once again, the reason we ask ourselves that question is because right here on page 541, you can see a question literally asking you for the main point. Now, these are warm-up questions. In some cases, you will notice that the book has information for you about these questions. Don't look at that. Just focus on the questions themselves. Since this is our first question, we are going to do this as a team. So we're just going to take a look at each and you're going to tell me if this is a match for what we just discussed. Answer choice A. Is this a match for the main point we just went over? Okay, hearing no, what don't you like? I'll put those words in red, of course, red for stop, and move on to the next question, or in the next answer choice. What don't you like? Yeah, there's a little bit of questionable stuff that happens earlier, but the big nail in the coffin is really this standard national curriculum. A standard national curriculum was never mentioned in any way, shape, or form. Now, it is true that the author does bring up a potential negative, which is why at the beginning talks about this reservation, right? That's kind of what happened in the last paragraph. So the beginning can sound a little weird, but it does seem to relate to the last paragraph. So the thing you can really know for sure is this standard national curriculum. Moving on to B. Is this a match? Okay, I'm here to know why. Always get specific with these. What language is too extreme? Yeah, it says ultimately more important. Well, okay, yes. There was the example where case law didn't seem relevant to, the real situation. But the author never says the statutory law is more important, right? And if you were unsure and you kept reading answer choice B, what word would let you know like 110% for sure that answer choice B is wrong? What does B say near the end that just never happened at all? Right, this concept of there being a reversal mark. Bella, very nice. Now, don't get me wrong, you could definitely stop sooner than that. If you stopped at ultimately more important, that is awesome. That's great. But you could definitely stop at that reverse. Okay, moving on to C. What about this? Okay, I hear an emphatic yes. What are the reactions? Okay, more yeses. What do you like? What is working for you here? What does it say? Well, it does a lot of good here. A lot of elements we like. Well, it mentions everything, right? Well, one, it lists out the positives, right? Remember, the positives were synthesis and also being able to interpret statutes, because statutes are tough to interpret, right? But not only does this list the positives, it lists the major point, which is that law schools should provide training in statutory law, right? That there should be this statutory law training that is happening. Now, why is this although portion here? And Bella, we'll get to the other answers in a moment. I want to make sure everyone's clear, though. Why is this although present and okay? Because, what is that? Amy, exactly. That was the negative. That's the flaw. Shannon, Bella, thank you so much. That's the negative associated with statutory law, that the statutes typically vary region to region. But remember, the author shoots that down and shows that it's still worthwhile. So really, every part of this works. It's kind of doing it all backward, right? Where it gives us the negatives, says it should be taught, and then tells us the reasons why it should be taught, the positives, right? But answer choice C really is giving us each part that we wanted from that passage. Let's talk about why these other answers don't work for us. Answer choice D. Why is D wrong? Or could you really stop here? Walter, it is true that once you read C, recognize it as a match on test day. Heck, in time practice, I hope you pick and move. We're only looking at the others because this is our first question and it's class. Okay, number one, we've got this theoretical world of law school training. That already seems a little odd, though notice this theory versus actual practice. That could be referring to teaching in law schools versus the reality, right? So that could be what we learned at sort of the end of paragraph 1, beginning of paragraph 2. What else would take this out? Yeah, the most important, does the author think that a focus on case law is the most important asset a student can have? No. That's the opposite, right? Remember, law schools are focusing on case law. The author wants to focus on stat law, right? So this is a 180. Don't get me wrong, that beginning part is questionable, but I want you to notice that theoretical versus actual could relate to law schools and reality. Just heads up. Okay, answer choice E. We had already seen that some people were interested in answer choice E. Why is it wrong? Well, what does it do that's a classic wrong answer type? It's excessive, it's too extreme, it's too strong, as Jeremy, Kristen, and Aaron are all telling me. What wording is too much? Okay, for sure the fail, right? When it says they fail to impart the skills necessary for analysis. Why do they fail? Sure, we got this instance, where case law isn't enough, but doesn't mean they fail, right? Also saying that they are generally deficient. Yes, the author indicates that there's a problem, but we don't know for sure that law schools are just generally deficient across the board. So that language is a bit much. Please also note it's not doing all the great things that C was in terms of saying there should, be more of, statutory law training. Here are the positives associated with it, and here's that negative that doesn't matter. Really, answer choice C hits everything that the passage does. Please note that the right answer to a main point question will not always be as beautifully perfect as answer choice C to talk about everything, but this is a really good example to get you started. Speaking of good examples to get you started, this was a global question. Please note that global questions will often be the very first question you do, much like an acceptability is the first question in a game. Global is usually the first question in a reading comp passage. Not all global questions are going to be super easy 1 stars, but a lot of them are very manageable. So it's a very good question to start with in the vast majority of cases. You can sometimes get another global questions. If you do, it'll often be at the end, though sometimes we see them in the middle, but usually global questions are at the beginning and potentially at the end. Take a look at this next question on screen. Let me know, please, what sort of question is this? What type of question? And if you're not remembering the types, that's okay. You can just look at this laminated strategy sheet. We list the reading comp type of questions right there for you. Yeah, this is detail. This is which of the following is cited in the passage. Okay, if this is a detail question, how does that mean you should be approaching it? What do we say about these? Generally speaking, you're going to want to go back and read, right? And the reason for that is the correct answer will usually be almost word for word the same as the passage. Where would you go to reread based on the clue? Because notice this question gives you a clue as a word of research. Where would you go? Which paragraph would you go to? Well, it says, what would be a reason for not doing statutory law training? Where did we learn the bad? The bad is at the very end. It's true that in the second paragraph, it talked about that statutes are not always so obvious, and that's why I teach them. And that was kind of like a little bad, but the kind of big bad that the author brings up here is in the last paragraph where the author talks about an argument against. Steve, exactly right. So what you would want to do is literally go back and look at this paragraph, and there's a couple marks up on screen you can use if you like. But I'm going to give you all the opportunity to solve this question on your own. I'll give you 45 seconds for this. That's the average amount of time for reading comp questions. Plus, I know a lot of you might already feel ready to solve this. If you finish early, just move forward in your books. There are other questions associated with this passage. Talk more soon. All right, that is time. Go and let me know in the chat, everybody, how you feeling about this. Do you think you found the part of the passage that mirrors the right answer? Feel pretty good? Feel pretty confident? We have 87% of you in the right answer. Good job. E is it. If you pick someone else, like answer choice A or D, don't stress it. We will, of course, be going over it. First up, though, let's talk about how you could have known E. Honestly, when you went back and reread, your margin notes could have been enough, because what did we say was the big negative with statutory law training? We talked about this. We paused, we slowed down for that part. That it varies, exactly right. We said the whole negative is that it varies by region, boom. And answer choice E says that thing. It talks about that statutes are generally non-transferable because they vary, right? So because of that, you can get to answer choice C. Now, answer choice A. How is this wrong? This is actually the same type of trap answer we saw happen in the previous question. It's the test makers using the same trick on you. Kristen, it is outside the scope in that the author never talks about diverting resources away, but also it says more important ability to analyze cases. Does the author ever say that analyzing cases is more important than stat law? No. And notice again, this is the same sort of wrong answer that we had over here. Case law, most important. There's a trend. And the test makers are doing this because they know some students are going to get the opinions flipped. They're going to think what the law school's viewpoint is instead of what the author's viewpoint is here. Now, it is true, we're talking about a negative associated with statutory law, but that negative associated with it never says we're taking time away from the thing that's really more important of case law. Moving on to D. Why is D incorrect? What word does it mention? It's just, yeah, irrelevant. Remember again, as the author ends up telling us, even though the actual statutes don't transfer, the skills transfer. So it's not that it's going to be relevant. So really and truly, if you had slowed down appropriately at the beginning of this paragraph and noticed that big weakness is that variance from region to region, again, that makes them non-transferable, you can really answer this question quite quickly and move forward with the rest. Speaking of moving forward with the rest, question 2, what sort of question is this? Okay, this is an LR question type specifically. Right, we are here to weaken. Notice it's weaken the author's argument. So this is LR, specifically weaken. Now, as you heard me say before, if we're weakening the author's argument, what does that mean we're weakening? The main point, right? Or in other words, if the author thinks that there should be more of this statutory law training, we want an answer that does what? Don't tell me the answer choice. Tell me what we're searching for. Right, that refutes that, that goes against that, that indicates why we don't need the statutory law training. Where would you research to solve this question? What do you think? Where would you go? Okay, I noticed that there are a lot of question marks there, and there's a good reason for this. The last paragraph does bring up a potential argument against. Again, the idea that the statutes vary from region to region, right? But notice the wording. It says, which of the following would, if true, most weaken? So it's basically saying, hey, we're going to bring some new facts to the table, right? So what A3 are going to say are generally going to be new things. But one of these new facts is going to go against the idea that there should be statutory law training. So since these are new things, you don't necessarily need to research for this question in a similar way that you often don't need to research for main idea questions. Don't get me wrong, you could potentially go back and do some rereading in the last paragraph if necessary, but primarily if you just keep in mind you need to weaken the author's main point. What I'll do to help remind you of that is put up the main idea on screen. So keep in mind your idea Your goal is to weaken that author's main point. We're going to give you 45 seconds like we did for the last. If you finish early, just keep on trucking, move forward to the next. All right, that is time. How are you feeling about this question? Think you got it? Feeling good? Feeling medium? Feeling not so good? I'm seeing some interesting votes. Obviously, a question like this can be a little bit harder because you're not pulling from an exact part of the text. Instead, you're needing to read each of these answer choices and saying to yourself, what impact would this have on the idea of there being more statutory law training? If you ever hit a question like this that you can't easily research, that feels a little ambiguous, please know it would be perfectly okay to move past this. The main reason we're doing it now, though, is that this question, as I mentioned before, is very similar to a global since it ties back to the main idea. So if you are clear on how to awaken the main idea, this question can actually be pretty quick. If we take a look at the votes, overall, you all did well. We have 70% in the right answer of B, and many of you have gotten to that right answer of B very, very quickly. Now, you'll also notice we have the rainbow. Every single other answer choice has been chosen, and I will talk about these because this is our warm-up period. Really make sure you're understanding how these reading comp questions work. First things first, let's talk about B. How would B weaken the idea that there should be more of this statutory law training in law school? Oh, they wouldn't need to, meaning this says that most lawyers will easily and quickly develop proficiency in statutory law just through work experience. Wait a second. If they'll learn about statutory law and work experience, do schools need to spend time teaching it? If they'll just learn super quick afterward, why bother? You're going to learn it right after school anyway. So that's why answer choice B is correct, because if B is true, if work experience would give these students that skill, well then it weakens the idea that it needs to be taught in law schools as well. Let's take a look at these other answer choices. What would answer choice A actually do if law school administrators are recommending that statutory law is in schools? That would agree with the author, right? That would support what the author is doing. This is classic strengthen and weaken, everybody. And what I mean by that is in weaken questions, wrong answers will often do the opposite of what you want. And that's what's happening in A. A is really a 180 answer choice, meaning it's the opposite of what we're searching for. If A was true, that would support what the author believes as opposed to weakening it. So as soon as you see that administrators think that there should be statutory law training in schools, it's out. Moving on to C. Why is C wrong? C is definitely tempting. Why is it wrong? Katie, the author refutes this. Sarah, right, they would still have the skills. Charles, the author, addressed this. Bella, exactly right. They still learn despite geography. In other words, yes, C does seem to be bringing up a negative, right? Because it tells us that lawyers are not practicing in the same geographic area as law school, right? And as we know, if they were getting training in statutory law in law schools, the statutes would vary region by region. But remember, the author addressed this whole concept and said the skills do transfer. So C wouldn't weaken the argument because the author has already refuted this concept in the last paragraph. Again, tricky answer choice. One that you do need to remember what happened in the passage for that, or even potentially go back and reread that last paragraph, as I said you might need to do. All right, D. Why is D wrong? Why does this not weaken? And I know a lot of you may not have even gotten this far. You might have just saw B pick the move, and that's great. But I want to make sure you see it. Well, this is just saying that they rely primarily on analysis of cases. Is this something we talked about, that law schools focus on case law? Yeah, I mean, sure, it's adding in the regionally oriented law schools, so you might think you need to research the last paragraph, but this idea, right, that they're focusing on cases doesn't have a huge impact on the argument. And if it was having an impact, it would be, well, if they're relying primarily on analysis of cases, maybe they should get some stat law in there. So this is anywhere from outside the scope to even potentially a 180. But the fact that they're relying primarily on analysis of cases, that doesn't weaken the notion that we should add in statutory law. And answer choice E. Why is this wrong? Yeah, it's the same thing. E and C are very, very similar to each other, right? This is saying, oh, they only know a narrow range of statutes, right? So that could be a problem. But wait, it's not, because if they've learned the statutes, then they have the skills to learn other statutes too. So really, both answer choice E and answer choice C are bringing up a known weakness associated with statutes, but it's a weakness that the author got rid of. Once again, if you pick B and move, you never need to get into those super tempting traps of C&E, where I did see a number of votes. As always, everybody, if you have a lingering question about one of these answer choices, let us know in the private Q&A. We're going to spend a little bit longer here because this is our warm-up time before we eventually set you loose. All right, moving onward to our next one, 3. What type of question is this? What do we have going on here? Katie, you should absolutely pick and quit whenever you find the right answer on any part of the test. Excellent strategy, especially when doing time sections or practice tests or on test day. Aaron, you are right. Notice this says basically what is the point of the third paragraph. See how it states third paragraph primarily in order to, like, why is it there, right? And so that is a logic function question. We talked before about the fact that if a question asks you the function of a whole paragraph, what should you look at? And Bella, Allison, Aaron, thank you all for IDing this one correctly. Where should you be going to solve this question? Go to your margin notes. Yeah, you should go take a look at the third paragraph. And obviously, these margin notes are not necessarily identical to yours. You should take a look and say, okay, what was this paragraph about? What is the point of this paragraph being there? I will tell you as well, think of the passage as the whole, just like in role of a statement, where you find the phrase in question and then you compare it to the conclusion. It's the same thing here. Say to yourself, what is paragraph 3 doing? And also, how does paragraph 3 relate to the rest of the passage? Why is it included? All right, like before, 45 seconds. Good luck with this. We'll talk when that time is up. All right, we have the votes. Like role of a statement, logic function questions can sometimes be tricky. Keep in mind what we just showcased in the previous questions. As soon as you find some words that make that answer extreme, outside the scope, 180, what you're looking for is wrong. And also remember, think about what paragraph 3 is doing. We talked about it in a couple ways. You had predicted what paragraph 3 was going to do. We then discussed what paragraph 3 was going to do. Let's take a look at your answers. We do have the clear majority in the right answer of A, almost 70% of you. We do have a good chunk in some other answers like B, C, and D, especially answer choice C. We'll be going over each of those. Okay, before I even look at these answers, tell me please, what does your roadmap say about the third paragraph? Tell me what your roadmap says on your page. And it's okay to get it wrong. We're going to be reviewing. But what did your roadmap say about paragraph 3? That it supports, right? That this is, right, this is helping, supporting, this is something else good, right, about statutory law training, right? Like this is another reason why statutory law should be taught, right? If we take a look at answer choice A, what are the words that relate to that? So whether you picked A or not, give it a look and tell me what are the words that really line up with what many of you had in your roadmap. One of the benefits. That's it. Boom, right there. This is just describing one of the benefits that would happen if we did what is advocated in the passage. Now, I know some of you out there didn't like this phrase advocated in the passage. I know if this had said instead one of the benefits of statutory law training, then we might have had like 100% of you or 98% of you in the right answer. And that's, of course, why the test makers don't do that. They want you to be able to read what is advocated in the passage and say in your head, oh, the thing that was advocated, the thing that the author was arguing for, that's what advocate means, is the statutory law training. So a benefit of doing statutory law training. Let's talk about B. Why is this wrong? Why isn't this working? It's tempting. Well, so notice it says law schools currently value certain other skills. So we get the law professors, and it does say they favor the ability to apply, right? Law in particular cases, so on and so forth, right? So this little area with the law professors does seem to relate to answer choice B. Why doesn't that work though? Because is this one sentence the purpose of the whole paragraph? What do you think? Is this one little part where we learn about law schools and what they favor over synthesis? No, that's not the overall purpose, right? Also, we're not getting a lot of information that explains why this is so. It more just says that they favor this ability over the other, and that's it, okay? So notice that this answer choice is really getting too specific. It also says it explains why this is so, and that doesn't really happen. So too specific. This is something that also happens in the main point questions, where an answer choice will bring up a detail that happened in the passage you read, but it's not the main point of the whole passage. All right, answer choice C. Why is this wrong? What's the wording? It's tempting. I know when you read like argue, you're like, yes, the author is arguing for statutory law. Yeah, you've seen multiple times now where the test makers have given you answers that say that statutory law has more importance than case law. The author is not pushing that. The author is pushing that statutory law should be included, right? But it's the same trap that test makers are giving you again and again and again. This comparison between statutory law and case law and saying greater importance, all right? Now, Katie, the author does say that it is especially important, but does the author say that it has more importance than something that was discussed earlier in the passage, i.e. case law, right? And that's why this ends up being an irrelevant comparison. So tempting, though, right? That's why we saw so many of you voting for answer choice C. But I hope you now are starting to see the similarities of wrong answers we've seen happen in this set, all right? Moving finally to answer choice D. What word here is also too much? So greater importance was going too big and an irrelevant comparison. D is too much because it says necessary, right? They said it's especially important, didn't say that it was necessary for the study. So really going back and rereading can be useful to you, though I will say again, picking and moving can save you a lot of heartache and time. If you have in your margin notes, this is another positive of statutory law training. You can pick answer choice A super quick because it says one of the benefits of what is advocated, i.e. statutory law training. All right, moving onward, we just have a couple more questions, and this is the really hard stuff. What type of question is this, number 4? Give it a look, let me know. So question 4. It's tricky, right? Notice it says clearly and directly answered. So this is very concrete. And what type of question do we say is going to be more concrete? This is a detailed question, all right? What is making this detailed question hard, though? What's challenging about this detailed question? Where's the clue? Exactly right. This is a question that is not providing you with any sort of insights in terms of where you'd be going back to research and read, okay? Here's the way you should treat questions like this. Classically, we would skip a question like this because, again, we don't have much insight into where to go read. Instead, we would need to check each answer and research them, and that could be very time-consuming, all right? I will tell you, though, before you skip, you can skim and just see, is there an answer that leaps out to you? Go ahead and do that for me, everybody. Skim through this. I'm not saying you have to get this question right by any stretch. But just let me know, is there anything that stands out to you? What do you think? Okay, so something like D, right? So I'm hearing B, I'm hearing D, I'm hearing C, I'm hearing, okay. I want to show you something. This is why we did this. If there are 4 answer choices, and I'm not saying that all of you think that 4 answer choices are standing out, but if you have 3 or 4 answers that sound like they could be right, what does that tell you immediately, everybody? Sort of, you skim through these, you're like, okay, yeah, no, I'm out, I'm leaving, this is not a good question, see ya, and that instantly tells you to skip. And that's what we're going to do. We are going to skip this question, right? Please note, though, if there was only 1 answer that looked good for you, you could just pick it. And if there were 2, you could research them both to figure out which one's right. And don't worry, we'll definitely cycle back around to this one. And I know that some of you out there were only seeing 1 or 2 answers that sounded good for you. But whenever you have a question that's not giving you any clues, you can quickly skim. 1 or 2 answers stand out, you could do the question. If not, skip it, get out of there. But we'll definitely come back to this. Moving on, what type of question is this? It's tricky, right? Because notice it says the author expects. Whenever we have a question asking us about the author, like author POV, what they think, what they believe, agree, that is an inference question. What's making this question tough, though? What's hard about this question? It's an inference except, okay? And it's not just an inference except about anything, right? It says the author would expect from the course of action proposed, so what the author would expect from there being more statutory law training. So 4 of these will be things that the author would likely think is going to take place. We need to find the one that isn't listed. Where are you going to research to find something that the author isn't expecting? Where would you be rereading to answer this question? Where can we find what the author is not expecting? Is there anywhere that will tell you what the author is not expecting to happen? Nope, it's not even going to be in the passage. So what's the only way you could solve this question? Probably elimination, right? You need to go through and find the ones that do align with what the author believes. So where does the author talk about statutory law training being included in law schools? Where does that happen in the passage? So we could eliminate our way down. Paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4. Where does the author mention what would happen? I mean, a lot of the passage everywhere, right? What do you think we should do for this question if the right answer isn't even going to be in the text, and to research the wrong answers, we're going to need to look all over the place? Skip this question, right? This is tough. Don't get me wrong. It can be solved. I will tell you this does end up being the hardest question to set. But the good news is you can tell pretty easily that this is going to be tough and to get out of there. And remember, again, skip means we will cycle back to it. Okay. 6. What type of question is 6? Kristen, it depends on your timing. Assuming you're within the 8.5 minutes you have to read the passage and answer the questions, you would cycle back within that 8.5 minute period. If you're over, you'd wait until the end of the section as time allows. Right, this is another inference question. It also talks about the author would be likely to agree. What clue does this question give you? Well, we know it's agreeance, for sure. But it talks about, again, training in statutory law. Where does the author talk about training in statutory law? That's, again, kind of everywhere. All right. So out of these 3 questions, which one would you start with if you're noticing that all of them are challenging? Where would you begin? Where would you go? I'll let the majority decide. Keep in mind there's just 3. There's this one that's talking about what would the author agree with statutory law. Then there's this one, which is the accept. So 4 of the wrong answers are going to align with statutory law training. We got to pick the odd one out. And then there was 4 we have no clues at all. Okay, I'm hearing mostly 6, so that's the one that I'm going to let you do. All right. Please note, since there are multiple paragraphs you could be researching, I will expect you to do that in your book. All right, so use your book to research as needed to solve this question. As usual, I'm going to give you 45 seconds, though if it takes you slightly longer, that's okay because we are into the harder stuff. Go ahead. All right, that is time. Giving you just a few more moments. See, I've seen a lot of votes. I don't know, hold off. A lot of people are jumping in the last moment being like, picking something. That's fun, that's fun. All right, I'm gonna reveal now. In 3, 2, and 1. We do have the clear majority and the right answer of B. This is a question where you really can skim these answers, and for a lot of students, answer choice B leaps off the page. Who can tell me why? What is it about answer choice B that makes it stand out, that triggers something in your memory from the reading? And you could do research as needed. You could go back and reread if required. Right. It says that this training in statutory law would help them answer stuff that is not immediately apparent. Where did that happen? Where did we talk about where it's not as obvious and training would help when it's not as obvious? Boom, paragraph 2. So what can happen in a lot of cases is as you're looking through answer choices in a question where it could seem really open-ended, meaning in question 6, we didn't know exactly where to research. But as you're skimming through those answers, reading answer choice B, you could say, wait, I think I read something like that. And you would go back to your margin notes and you would see that is exactly what the end of paragraph 2 is talking about. All right. Notice this is one reason why we save these tougher questions until the end. It just so happened that they were placed at the end, but we would save them at the end because we've already done more reading, researching, and so we're in a good place to solve a question like this. Now, I know that there are other answer choices that are tempting, so let's talk about them. Answer choice A. What's wrong here? What does A bring up that just doesn't work? Talks about what? Which just didn't happen. One, it's a comparison between national versus regional, which didn't really take place. I mean, sure, in the last paragraph, we talked about, national and the various statutes are located by region, but this sort of comparison between national and region didn't happen, especially not in comparison to equally deficient in the teaching of case law. We never said that a school wasn't teaching enough case law. The only thing that we ever said schools weren't teaching enough of was what? What's the one thing that we said schools should be teaching more of? That is the stat law. Exactly right. So the test makers keep trying to bring up case law in places where they should not. Okay, talk to me about C. Why is this wrong? New info about what? What is it? What does it bring up info about that we were just discussing? It brings up info, manipulating details of what? Of past cases. Wait a second. Did we ever say that training in statutory law will make you more boss at past case analysis? No, that didn't happen, right? So I just hope you're seeing again the trend, the through line here, that they keep bringing up case law and talking about it incorrectly. You see that happen in A and C, as well as other questions we've done. As I said before, never feel bad if you pick a wrong answer here. Please make mistakes, pick wrong answers in class so we can talk about them, so you can understand and do it differently next time. All right, answer choice E. Why is this wrong? What concept does answer choice E bring up that just flies in the face of the author's entire main idea? Goes completely against it. Well, it goes against that law. It says that they have little need for training in statutory law. Whoa. Did the author ever tell us about a situation where stat law wouldn't be needed? Where stat law shouldn't be taught or learned by students? No, yeah, I'm on E because we didn't have any picks in D. So yeah, I know a couple of people were actually answering for D. In answer choice E, it's the fact that it talks about this little need for training in stat law, and that goes against what the author is saying. I'll always try to put an arrow beside the answer that I'm working on. I hope that helps just for future, because I'll only go over answers that were picked just for timing constraint reasons. All right, moving onwards, what would you do out of what remains with questions 4 and 5, everybody? Would you do the accept, or would you do 4? And please note, if you were out of time, you would just be guessing on both of these and moving, all right? I'm seeing relatively equal, though 5 looks like it's winning by a small margin. So that is the one that I will set you loose in question 5. Please note, if you're working on it and you don't like it, you could always change to question 4 instead. All right. Good, everybody. I'm going to give you that 45 seconds as usual. Good luck on this. We'll talk more soon. All right. I am very curious to hear from you all. How are you feeling on this question before I reveal the answer? What do you think? Aaron says trash, or I guess, as others have said. If you are feeling that way, what does that mean you should probably do in the question? If you're looking at the question, you're just like, I got nothing. Like, I'm going through it, I'm reading answers, I'm trying to research, I don't know. Guess on this and move to question 4, right? Assuming you still have a little bit of time. Honestly, this question is not going to make or break you. And I know that that is hard for many students. I know that when you were taking the diagnostic, most of you probably read the first passage and then answered all the questions, and then read the second passage and then answered all the questions, and then read the third passage and answered all the questions, and then ran out of time, if not ran out of time before. Just because you read the passage, that does not mean you need to answer every question associated with it. In fact, by skipping some of the tougher questions, that is what is going to allow you to get to all 4 passages and get to some of the easier questions that are happening later in the section. Okay? To emphasize this point, I'm going to go ahead and reveal the poll. We have never seen percents like this today. And I hope this again shows how challenging this question is. As if that was not enough, for the first time, we do not have the highest number of votes on the right answer. The right answer here is A. I know some of you might already be thinking, what? And that, once more, showcases why this is not a question you need. All questions are worth the exact same points. This is, again, just a time sink. With that said, let's talk about it. So, remember again, we are looking for something that the author didn't mention, meaning 4 of these things the author would expect. One of them was not said. What does A bring up that just doesn't happen in relationship to if we had more training in stat law? Because notice this is conforming to the educational results that the author would think would happen. You're going to see a trend here, everybody. We've said it a bunch of times, actually. Yeah, it says locating references to court decisions. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What does that sound like? That we've talked a fair bit about today. Court decisions, that's case law. Is case law going to improve if there's more training in statutory law? No, negatory. And that's why this is the right answer, because we need the exception. The author would not expect skills to get better in case law if there was more statutory training. This is one that if you read A, notice that it's going against or would be the exception. You can pick and move and get out of there. As I said, though, tough question, so it's very easy to think that A may not be the right answer and keep reading. Let's talk about why these other things would be happening if there was statutory law training. What does B bring up that relates to statutory law training as we are aware of it? What skill does answer choice B bring up that the author attributes to statutory law training? Part of it is understanding. Understanding what? Understanding Well, the underlying purposes, right? So underlying concepts, especially when we've got, what does it talk about? This is something we saw happen in the third paragraph. Understanding, this relates to synthesis, the interrelated groups. Yeah, the author talks about how statutory law would help with understanding relationships between groups. That's why B is out. Moving on to C. What does C bring up that relates to a study of statutory law? Right, you'd have more knowledge about statutes, which could include how they are formulated, right? Because if you know more about statutes, then you could know more about how maritime statutes are formulated. Moving on to D. What does D say that would relate to statutory law training? Familiarity with what? Right, familiarity with wording as it relates to a region or locality. We talked about before that statutes are regionally based, right? The wording associated with that region. So again, this ties to what we learned about statutory law training. And E. What does E mention? This is kind of similar to the previous, actually. Yeah, wording, again, understanding the wording of things. So you can see that same concept happening in both D and E. Again, please do not think that this is easy. This is a very tough question, as you saw from the votes. But if you are going to solve it, you want the one that is not related to statutory law, which is basically case law, i.e. court decisions, as A says, where all of B, C, D, and E do relate in some way, shape, or form to what we learned in terms of what statutory law training would help out with. All right, last but not least, question 4. I'll be interested to see if you end up liking this one better or not. This is our final question in the passage, and after this, we will, of course, be taking our second break. 45 seconds, everybody. We'll talk when time is up. Please begin. All right. That is done. This is one of my favorite questions in the set because it shows the importance of wording. This, for some students, can actually be pretty easy, pretty straightforward. For others, it can really be a battle. If we take a look at your votes, you will see that there is a big battle, primarily happening between answer choice D and answer choice E. We do actually have some votes in A, which I find very interesting because when I previously asked what stood out to you, no one said A, but that's okay. We can totally talk about A too. Let's talk about D and E, and then I'll talk about answer choice A. First up, D. And I haven't said what is right yet. D says, what are some objections that have been raised against including the study of statutes in regionally oriented law schools? Okay. Talk to me about this. We had 60% of you pick it. What did you like? Let me know. Cameron answered in the final paragraph, right? Let's take a look at the final paragraph. So, final paragraph. Does the final paragraph talk about objections from regionally oriented schools? Research. Remember, this is why we mark this, so you can go back and reread. Where is that happening? Tell me the line. We got a line for this? Yeah, the only schools that are brought up is it says But for schools that are nationally oriented, this could seem to be an inappropriate investment of time and resources. And think about why that is, everybody. The problem with statutes is they don't transfer from region to region. So if it's a nationally oriented school, it's a problem. Is it going to be a problem for a regionally oriented school? Would a regionally oriented school have a problem with statutes that are in a given region? No, because the statutes are focused in that region. This is the test makers being sneaky, subbing in region instead of national. Now, if anyone out there is like, how am I supposed to remember that, Jeff? Are you supposed to have that memorized? You tell me in chat. No. What are you supposed to do to make sure you get this question right? You're supposed to go back. Exactly. You're supposed to say, oh, the last paragraph is where we talked about there being problems. I'm going to go check and make sure that this answer matches. That's what you need to do. And I know a lot of you didn't end up doing that, but I hope you see the power of doing so. Also notice that it said objections, and really there's just a primary objection about varying region to region, and again, not for regionally oriented schools. So there's a couple different things that could let you get rid of this choice. Primarily, though, it is this regionally oriented and that objection on this. All right, taking a look at E. What is the primary focus of curriculum offered in most law schools? Where do we learn what law schools do? Where does that happen? Look at your roadmap. Remember, this is why we have a roadmap. Oh, it's paragraph 1, right? Does it tell us what law schools focus on? Yeah. It says much of legal education with its focus on judicial decisions and analysis of cases. What does that mean about answer choice E, everybody? When answer choice E says, what is the primary focus of most law schools? It means it's right. What do you think, everybody? Could researching in a question that is open-ended like this help you? Do you think looking back to the passage could assist with your decision? I hope you're really seeing the power of going back. This is why we make the notes, right? If they're going to give you a line number, if they're going to give you a paragraph number, well, then our margin notes aren't quite as important. But in a situation like this, critical. Because if you go back and say, oh, yeah, I know what most law schools are doing. I know what their primary focus is. You're done. Now, taking a look at answer choice A. This one says, what are some ways in which synthetic skills are strengthened or encouraged through analysis of cases and judicial decisions? Okay, where was synthesis talked about? Again, let's keep up with this theme of researching. Synthesis is in paragraph 3, right? We know where to go for that, right? So go to paragraph 3. Does this talk about ways in which case law or judiciary decisions could strengthen synthesis? Because that's what answer choice A says. No, in fact, it's kind of the opposite, because when it's focusing on cases, that's not the synthesis. So that's how we can know that this particular answer choice is wrong. What I hope you take away from this analysis is question 4 actually gave us fairly researchable answer choices. So when you were solving or attempting to solve a question like 5, and maybe felt a little lost, felt like you didn't know where to go back and reread, you really should get out of there. Because it would be so unfortunate if you spent a bunch of time in 5 and then didn't have the time to research in a question like 4. Now, I know some of you might be saying, Jeff, well, then why did we even skip 4 initially? Well, because we want to skip questions that are not giving us clues initially, so we can get to other easier questions that are in that same set. And many of you did quite well on question 6, actually, right? So it was good that we got to question 6. It was just going back that question 4, if you researched correctly, could actually be easier than question 5. All right, all. Good work on this. It is definitely time for our second break. When we return, we are going to give you the opportunity to read the whole passage on your own using the techniques we've talked about, and then do some of the questions associated with it. And then we'll wrap with just a little preview of comparative reading, and that'll finish up our class session tonight. As always, if there is anything on your mind, something you'd like to ask, I'm going to be right here for the opening minutes of break. Otherwise, relax, enjoy yourselves. I'll see you again soon. Any questions for me? Because break has begun. Any of these, question 4, 5, 6, or something else you'd like me to discuss? If so, shout it out. That ask questions in them, right? Because for each you would need to read the passage associated with it. What I can tell you though is detailed questions that do not give you a clue, and that's exactly what's happening here, where it says the passage answers which of the following questions. That is a detail without a clue. These sorts of questions do pop up, and you will get to experience them the more you practice reading comp passages. So overall, what you're going to want to focus your energy on will be practicing the reading in the new way we've showcased, practicing answering all questions. With that all said, you can see more of these types of questions that lack research clues by attending the channel session, live or recorded, that goes over the most difficult types of questions. In that specific lesson, we have some details without clues and some inference without clues. And the way you defeat both of those is really the same. Detail without clues, inference without clues. The only major difference is the right answer to a detail without clues will often be word for word. Inference, generally more synonyms. So you can get more of these in that specific channel lesson. However, I would recommend you practice some regular passages, regular questions first, and then venture into that because that's some of the hardest stuff. But just FYI. Oh, and yeah, teaching it later on. So that would give you actually an opportunity to practice this a bit on your own, meaning, just do regular passages in the questions, and then you can join me on October 7th if you'd like to see that lesson. Thanks so much, Hannah, for the assist. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and let you enjoy the rest of the break with music. Welcome back, everybody, to the home stretch of today's class lesson. We now are going to be looking at page number 592. And you'll even notice up on the screen, it talks about activate prior knowledge. And this is great because we've had a little bit of a break since we talked about how to read in this new way. And so now when I get to talk with you and ask you about how you should be reading in this new way, it's going to give you an opportunity to recall, to remember, or maybe even just flip through your notes and let me know what the new approach should be. And this is going to help with your retention. Let me know, please, when you're on page 592, so we can start to have that conversation about this passage. Page 592. Good, good, good. Glad to see a lot of you here. Now, for this part, I am going to be timing you, just so you get an opportunity to try it on your own. I'm going to give you 30 seconds for this first paragraph. It's going to be 30 seconds, but before I set you loose, what are you going to be doing as you read? What are the things we talked about that are going to be useful for efficiency? Okay, so margin notes. I'm just gonna write down the things you're telling me. Margin notes. We'll talk about each. Okay, speeding up and slowing down. Good. What else? Steve, you shouldn't need to look at the first couple of questions unless just throughout your whole life you've been reading questions first. And that's because the questions in reading comp on the LSAT are so predictable. We already have a sense of what they're going to be. But I'm really glad you brought that up in case anyone was thinking that they need to look in the first questions first. So keywords. Okay, so there's one other thing. I'm just waiting to see if people are going to mention. So keywords, margin notes, speeding up, slowing down. There's one other thing we talked about. What's going to relate to that thesis, and it is after you've read the first few sentences or maybe the first paragraph, what should you be able to do? Predicts the passage. Yep, exactly. You should have a sense of where that passage is going to go. We talked about some classic types of passages, absolutely, or you can just, again, think, if I was writing this essay, where would I take it? And that, again, gives you a sense of control. So first things first. What sorts of keywords should you be marking? Primarily opinions. Exactly right, because that's what the questions ask for. Should you be marking every opinion word that you see? No, right? Only mark ones that are providing you with new information, and if things get too cluttered, you can make a margin note about it instead. Okay, margin notes. How are you going to keep your margin notes efficient so they're not just long sentences of what you're reading? Shorthand, exactly right. Just like in logic games that we have shorthand, you should have shorthand for this. AU for author, or just star for author, plus for positive viewpoint, smiley face. You should have shorthand to boil it down for yourself. Keep in mind, if there's opinion, you're likely going to want to note about that. If there is no opinion, focus instead on what is just the overall topic that is happening in this part. Speeding up and slowing down. Where should you be slowing down? Slow down when there is opinion, right? Slow down in opinion. Also slowing down in the beginning so you get a sense of what the passage is about. Good. Also at the end. Slow down at the end because that's usually going to sum things up. Good. So opinions, beginning, and speed up really through everything else. Definitely speed up through examples, speed up through parts that are repetitive. In terms of predicting the passage, as you actually already heard me say, sometimes you'll be able to do this after just the first few sentences. In other cases, you can do it after the first paragraph. But you always take just a few seconds, at least at the end of the first paragraph, to say, where do I think this passage is going to go? It will really stop you from getting lost, or at least assist with you getting lost less, which will be a good thing. All right, we're going to give you 30 seconds to read. I know that may not seem like a lot of time, but this is a tiny paragraph. And remember, you don't need to read it all. Speed up and slow down as needed. 30 seconds, everybody. Please go ahead and begin. All right, that's time. Who out there thought that that was crazy quick? Who out there is like, oh my goodness, that was so fast. How could I possibly be getting the core concepts from this, right? Please note that you could potentially spend a little bit longer, but honestly, there's only a couple core ideas you need to take away from this paragraph. What are they? What were some keywords you might have marked? And there's a lot of potentials, so try to keep it focused. Well, yeah, the author wants to dispel the misunderstanding, right? The author specifically says the misunderstanding should be dispelled. So the author wants to get rid of this understanding. Okay? So basically there's a problem and the author wants to see it what? That's what's happening here. There's a problem, there's this misunderstanding, and the author wants it to be solved. So there you go. What else do we get in this paragraph of note? Any other big idea that popped out to you? Okay, so the author indicates that it should be achievable, although are you super surprised that the author is saying that it's achievable after the author has just said that an effort should be made to do that? I mean, be real with me right now. If the author just said, we should fix this, are you shocked that the author is saying, and we can do it? I would imagine probably not. In fact, it would be shocking if the author said, but we can't. You'd be like, whoa, then why are you saying we should? So this particular part where it says it's not too difficult, that's pretty repetitive to what we already know. What's something new that can pop out? We learn the what of the problem. Well, we learn the cause of the problem. Exactly right. We learn that it is primarily the result. So We have the problem that the author wants to get rid of. Now, again, if you wanted to mark author, you could, but notice we've got this word should, and we talked before about your highlighting or circling or underlining, working in tandem with your note-taking. So if you say, oh, this is what the author wants, this is a problem the author wants to get rid of. Not saying you had the right problem, but you could. And this is also the cause of the problem. We're learning how this problem came into being. Now, a couple of you are telling me that this is about the science and the humanists, and you're totally right. And that leads very naturally into our prediction, because within 30 seconds, you should be able to say, okay, there's a problem the author wants to see resolved, and here is the reason why the problem came into being in the first place. Okay? What do you think is going to happen in the rest of this passage? Where do you think it's going to go? Okay, the author's likely going to solve the problem, right? Do you think that's going to happen immediately? Do you think the very next paragraph is going to fix it? Probably not. I mean, it could, right? The author could be like, and here's how we fix it. But probably we're going to learn about why this misunderstanding exists in more depth, right? We're going to explain the problem in more depth, that type of thing. Explain both sides, as has also been brought up in chat. Okay, cool. All right, now this next paragraph is a bit longer, so I will be giving you 1 minute to read it. Again, keep things simple for yourself. Don't worry about too much, and remember to speed up and slow down, especially since this is a larger area. You shouldn't need to focus on all of this in depth. 1 minute, everyone. Please begin. All right, that is time. I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. Where did you slow down? Where were you reading slower in paragraph 2? Okay, I would definitely hope the beginning, right? Like in here, you'd be moving slowly. In the previous paragraph, in case you're curious, you'd be moving slowly at the beginning with the problem, and then down here with the cause, primarily. But definitely the beginning of the first paragraph. And what do you learn in the very beginning? What is it that catches your eye in the very beginning that makes you slow down? Okay, well, there's actually 2 parts, which makes it really, really interesting. The first would be some humanist, and then it talks about still identify, right? So we are learning the humanist point of view. Now, are you shocked that we're learning the humanist side of things? Are you surprised that the author of this is going, okay, we've got this argument between the 2 groups, and here's how one group feels about it, right? I hope not. I hope that relates very strongly to what we talked about before. And does this whole paragraph have to deal with the humanists? Is that the case? Is all of this humanist? Well, if you go down to the end, you'll see it says those who believe this also assert this is all still the humanists. So in that aspect of this particular paragraph, you can move really quick. You can just say, okay, this paragraph is the humanist POV. If a question asks me about the humanist POV, Here's what I'm going to go back and read. Boom, done, right? However, there's something else that's hidden within this paragraph that some of you noticed. What is it? This is the other big thing you'd be slowing down for. It's going to be something different than the humanist point of view. Because like I said, this whole paragraph is telling you what the humanists think in relationship to the scientists, right? All those little details, right, about what it is that the humanists think about scientists, I mean, you could take a couple of them away, that the humanist cares more about, essential values, or, they think science is ignoring stuff that matters. Okay. But the stuff that should really, really stand out to you is stuff like absurd, as a couple of you had said, like ignorant, like caricature. Why should these be popping? Why should absurd, caricature, ignorant, those really leap off the page at you? Well, that's definitely opinion. Whose opinion is that, my friends? That is author opinion, right? That's author opinion about the humanists. That is the author saying, humanists, yeah, I'm not a big fan of your opinions here, right? Right. So we would say author has a negative viewpoint about the humanists. And so that's really where you want to be slowing down. Once you get past that and we get into this like example and other stuff, boom, you can be moving really quickly through that. Now, I want to talk with you a little bit about marks, okay? You'll notice that we're using the same highlight for the humanist opinion, right, as the author opinion of absurd. And if you find that, confusing for yourself, it is okay to use different marks. Personally, I just like putting indications of it beside. So right beside, we've got the whole paragraph is the humanist POV, but then within that, we have the author's POV of the humanists. Which of those two things do you think you're more likely to get questions about? The humanist POV of the scientists or the author's POV of the humanist POV of the scientists? Which I think is more likely to happen? The author part, right? And that's why really and truly, everybody, this is where you're slow, and then boom, you're off to the races, really through all of this. I know that some of you might have paused with the those who believe this also, and it's okay if you pause a little bit there to be like, oh, this is more of the humanist POV. That's all right. But again, if you notice that this paragraph is really giving you what the author thinks of the humanists, that's more likely what the questions are going to be focused on. All right, continuing onward, we do have another tiny paragraph. I'm just giving you 30 seconds for this. It's 30 seconds to go through it again. You don't need everything. Speed up, slow down as we've gone over. 30 seconds, please begin. All right. What'd you notice? What is going on here? I bet some of you already had a prediction of what this paragraph was going to be about. Compared to last, oh, this is the science point of view, right? As soon as you read the previous, and it's about the humanists, you can be, oh, of course, this next paragraph will be the science POV. Do we get the same author commentary happening here? Do we get the author stepping in? Not really. The only language we get is the author calls them pragmatists. So, not a huge thing. All right. Now, with that in mind, do you need to worry about all the little nuanced details about the scientist opinion of the humanists? Not really. You mainly just need to know, do the scientists have a positive or negative opinion of the humanists? It's negative, right? And we already knew that from the very beginning, right? We know that there's this misunderstanding. We know they're fighting. That's why we're not even necessarily taking the time to write it, because that's been obvious the whole way through. If a question asked you about the scientist POV in more depth, you'd go back and reread paragraph 3. If the question's asked you about the humanist POV in more depth, you'd go back and read that. But like we said, most of the questions are probably going to be about the author. With this all said, even though the author doesn't say something specifically bad about the scientist here, do you think that the author is a fan of either the humanists or the scientists based on the first paragraph? Just out of curiosity. Do you think the author is pro either of these groups? Here no, maybe yes, right? Some of you at this point might be thinking maybe the author likes the scientist, right? Where do you think you'll find out how the author feels about these two? Yeah, probably in the last paragraph, right? So this is really a paragraph where you're slowing down just a little bit at the beginning and then boom, flying through this. This can go really quickly, all right? You think the author likes the humanists? Could be, right? But coming up next, we're going to find out. Now, obviously, this is a longer paragraph. We said before it's important to slow down a bit, especially at the end, because that's going to give us a nice summary. So I'm going to give you 1 minute for this, everybody. 1 minute. Go ahead and work through this paragraph again. Speed up, slow down as necessary, and we'll talk more when time is up. All right, that is time. Did we find out the answer? Did we find out if the author is pro-humanist or pro-scientist or against both? What do you think? What happens? Well, yeah. There's something really interesting that happens. We've been marking some limited keywords so far because the previous paragraphs have mainly been, scientist opinion, humanist opinion, but there's some really important keyword language that happens at the beginning of this paragraph. What is it? Talking to everybody, what should every single person here at least be slowing down and noticing that happens at the beginning? Well, Jeremy, exactly right. Before we get to them working together, right, as Belle is also bringing up, the author says that there are misconceptions among humanists and scientists alike, right? The author thinks that they are both wrong. Heck, the author even says that they're in need of correction, right? But I'm just highlighting the part that indicates they're both wrong, right? So they're both wrong. After the author says both wrong, and you could even list that in your margin notes if you wanted. That's some pretty important author voice for us to be aware of. Author says both wrong. What happens after that? You might notice. What keywords might stand out to you? And again, we want to be careful. We don't want to mark keywords that are right next to each other because we don't want to get confusing. But what's the concept that you notice happening after this? Scientific humanism. Yeah, how does the author feel about scientific humanism? Author approves, right? Author is like 2 thumbs, way up. So again, if you want to, you could do something along the lines of, author positive in relationship to scientific humanism, right? So we've slowed down quite a lot in this opening, right? And it's because we're getting language like, thus, there are things that are in need of correction for both of them, a much more acceptable position of scientific humanism. Note that that's why we're pausing there. Much more acceptable. That's huge opinion language, right? What about after this? So we know author thinks both are wrong, thinks it should be scientific humanism instead. What happens after that point? What does it give us? Well, it's definitely a recommendation, this idea that that's what they should be doing, right? Talks about common objectives, talks about similarities, talks about differences. Okay, there's a lot of details throughout this, but what does all of this content relate back to? What is all this whole chunk right there? That's all about what? Well, it relates to why the author approves of scientific humanism, right? This is really just info about scientific humanism. So we're just getting a lot of facts, a lot of info about the previous subject area, right? We're talking about they both care about a clear understanding. And I'm bringing this up because if you get mired in these details, that could slow you down. And it's very likely some questions can ask us about this area. This is the last paragraph after all, right? But you don't want to worry about memorizing every single little nuance. We'll research as needed. Okay, what happens at the end here? So maybe you're speeding up a little bit through that part. What's going on down here at the end? What did you notice? Anything that matters? We actually get a little bit of a pattern going on. Right, it brings up uninformed persons. Why would they do that? Why would the author take the time to be like, hey, here's what uninformed persons think? This is just the same pattern you saw happen in the previous passage. What is the author doing by bringing up uninformed persons? The author is just setting up a what? And Kristen, you're right. This is getting into, again, perhaps the misunderstanding, right? But I just want to make sure you all see the exact same pattern that happened in the previous passage. Katie, you are right. There is going to be a conclusion, but it's a refutation. Mary, Shannon, exactly right. Notice everybody, however, boom, right there. The author is setting up a concession. The author is saying, okay, sure, if uninformed persons keep doing it, this is going to continue to be a problem, right? But that's not going to be the case, right? So this is really, again, just a brief author concession, and then we get that author conclusion. And what is that author conclusion, everybody? What does the author want you to walk away with as the reader? What does the author say? Well, big opinion. Amy, absolutely right in this last sentence. Huge opinion. I mean, honestly, you could just highlight this whole last sentence. It's pretty awesome. But, right, the author thinks it can be done, right? Author, combo, and combo just means like scientific humanism, can be done, right? The author's like, yes, this can be achieved. And if a question asks us about that author's conclusion or how they think it can be achieved, okay, sure, then we'd go back and reread. So notice, beginning you're slowing down, speeding up some in the middle, and then slowing down again. Keep in mind, everybody, just because we've sped up or slowed down in a particular area, that doesn't guarantee, the location of questions. We're just saying where questions are probably going to be focused, right? But the most important thing is that you have things marked. Now, please do not think that you need every single mark that is currently on screen. How many of you read through this and knew the author thinks that they're both wrong and they need to do something else instead called scientific humanism, which can work? How many of you read this paragraph and walked away with that? Author thinks they're both wrong, do scientific humanism instead, and it is possible. If you had that, that is the core concept of this passage, all right? If you didn't, I hope you see now where that is coming from, okay? All right, everybody, we're going to do something real exciting, which is set you loose in the questions. Now, normally, you're going to spend about 3.5 minutes in your read and about 5 minutes in the questions, and that's what we're going to give you right now. Now, I realize that 5 minutes may not be enough time if you finish these questions. After all, we just talked with you about the different types of questions, and that's okay. Remember, as we said before, all the questions on the test are worth the same, clues, or that are complex. For example, accept. Now, remember what we said? If you encounter a question that does not have a clue, it is okay to quickly skim the answers to see if something leaps off the page at you. But as we also said, if 3 or 4 answer choices or all the answer choices are looking good to you, that's a good question to skip. Now, you have all the questions right here on pages 592, 593 that you can do. The only other quick thing that I want to leave you with before I set you loose is whenever you finish reading a passage, what should you do to prepare for the questions? What did we say? Here's a good idea to think of. Right, you want to say that main point, and you really get to it by thinking about purpose. Right, you would say to yourself, okay, was the purpose to argue or to inform? Go and tell me, everybody, what was the purpose here? Was the purpose to argue or inform? Which was the case? Does the author have an agenda, or is it just factual? Well, what did the author say from the very, very beginning? Very beginning. The author says this should be changed, right? So the author is walking with a very specific agenda. This is a problem, and it should be fixed, right? And that author opinion continues here where the author says they're both wrong or in need of correction. The author thinks that they're both incorrect, a much more acceptable scientific humanism. So we're definitely getting that argument. Now, we've already talked a little bit about what that argument is. I'll let you think about what that argument is, because that, of course, will help you answer the main point. The main point is whatever that argument is about. All right, all. 5 minutes. Good luck with these questions. Like I said, don't worry about answering them all. Just do the ones that are easiest for you, and we'll talk when time is up. Please begin. All right, that is time. Let me know in the chat below, how'd you feel about those questions? Okay, middle of the road, not so good. Okay. I'm honestly pretty impressed to hear that, considering you've been doing reading comprehension for almost 3 hours and 45 minutes. So if it wasn't too bad, that's good, right? Because you will not be doing this much reading comp on test day. So if you can do it now, test day should be a bit of a breeze. Okay, very first question is main idea. So of course, as we've said, this is a great question for you to do right off the bat, at least for most of you. Go ahead and tell me in the poll. I'm not going to cover the chat for this because we're just going to go through these nice and quick. Just click in your answer for me. And after about 5 seconds, I'll review. All right, taking a look at your votes. 96%, great job. What was it about answer choice E that really fit the bill to you? What did E do? Don't worry, we'll definitely talk about B as well. E mentions what? It works out really nicely for us. Right, it talks about the synthesis of science and humanities, which is just another word, of course, for this concept of scientific humanism, the combo. In fact, it even said synthesis in the beginning. Right, it says it's possible, as we learn at the end, and at the beginning, it says it's much needed, which it said at the beginning. So a lot of similar language from the first and last paragraphs here. Taking a look at answer choice B, the reason why this particular one is incorrect is because it focuses on materialism of science, idealism of humanities, and it says have both been beneficial. That would seem to indicate that the author likes what they're both doing, and again, the author thinks that they're both in need of correction, and scientific humanism should be replacing it. So that's what takes B out of the running. As always, if you have a lingering question about any of these, please feel free to ask. What was the next question you all did? I know a lot of you might have just done 21, but if you're following the order we suggested, where would you go next? Where was the detail question in the set? Yes, question 23. Please note that you can recognize this as a detail question because it says according to the author, so super concrete, plus it then gives you a little clue there of primary cause. Once again, everyone, please let me know your votes on this question, and I will reveal after a few seconds. Keep in mind, detailed questions, generally speaking, should not be answered from memory. These are questions you should be researching. And what that also means is if you don't know where the primary cause is, skip this question. Come back to it later. All right, taking a look at your answers, we do have 89% in the right answer with B. Good job. I'll show you why it's right and the others aren't, and it's really about that research. Remember again that the primary cause is given to us in the very first paragraph. So the primary cause is a result of a basic misunderstanding of the philosophical foundations of both science and the humanities. Again, that's the very last part of the first paragraph. And if you go back and read answer choice B, you'll see it's almost word for word the same misunderstandings of the philosophical foundations of each by the other. So really the key to success in detailed questions is all about that research. And that's what makes everything else incorrect, because you'll notice those other answers are saying things that are not the same as the end of the first paragraph. As always, if you have a question about it, then let us know, but research truly is the key. All right, there aren't any other global or detailed questions among the set. So at that point, you then just start working through the questions in order, doing questions that are providing you with clues. Notice that question 21 is giving you a clue. What type of question is 21, everybody? You can also vote as well. It is ready for you. 21 is a what question? It says author likely. Whenever it's bringing up what that author, yeah, it's an inference question. Where are you researching to solve this question? Because remember, research is what matters. It's an open book test. When it says a misunderstanding of science by a humanist. Okay, that's paragraph 2. For sure. Now, it's not just anywhere in paragraph 2. Where specifically in paragraph 2 should you be researching if this talks about the author? I'm going to go ahead and reveal your votes. We have 84.2% of you in the right answer, C. Good stuff there. Where should you be researching, though, to solve this? Not just anywhere in paragraph 2. Sophia, the opening part, exactly. You want to be researching in the area where we have absurd, caricature, and ignorant, right? We've got the absurd mechanistic reductionism. This is a caricature of science drawn by representing the humanities who are ignorant of the nature of modern science. We also get information in between those parts about they feel the scientist is interested in nothing more than bodies in motion, strictly mathematical, physical, so on and so forth. The reason why answer choice C works is it parallels what you're reading in that area. Answer choice C says science depends exclusively, notice that's very similar to strictly, on measurable data. Measurable data, that would be things like bodies in motion, mathematical, physical, chemical laws. It's also interesting to note that answer choice C sounds very similar to something you will have read in the last paragraph. So it is also possible to get this question right due to research in the last paragraph. But the exact wording of question 21 really should be taking you to paragraph 2. And since it's about the author, it's about the beginning of paragraph 2. Taking a look at D. D says science recognizes an irreducible spiritual element. This is a super tempting answer choice. And there's a reason why a lot of people go to it. Notice question 21 says an example. People see that example, and then they want to go read the example that is here in paragraph 2. But remember, that's not where the author's opinion is. If you're reading in that area, you will see this concept of irreducible spiritual element brought up. But notice, this is those who believe this also. It is the humanists who believe this, not the scientists. So when D says science recognizes an irreducible spiritual element, that is actually 180 of what the passage is saying. Again, you really even shouldn't be referencing that area, but if you are, that's how you can know it's wrong. Last but not least, E says science encourages the use of description and study of human values. Human values is something that's talked about later, not in paragraph 2, not in the area we need, so we can go ahead and eliminate this choice. Once again, by knowing where to research, it can really help you refine your search. Okay, moving on to 22. Why is this a question that the vast majority of you should have skipped? Why is this a question as soon as you see it, you should be out of there? No clues. Exactly right. It's not giving you anything. Now, like I said before, you could quickly skim, all right? And if an answer stands out to you, cool. But if not, you should definitely be getting out of there. Don't worry, we'll definitely bounce back to it. This asks you the function of the last paragraph. So what are you going to be using? In other words, where are you going to be rereading to solve question 24? Right, you're going to be going to that paragraph. You should be going to that final paragraph, and you should be using your margin notes. You should be thinking about how this paragraph relates. And Bella, I figured you meant paragraph 4. Shannon, exactly right, last paragraph. And you want to say, you know, what is the point of this last paragraph? I love question 24 because, like other questions we've done, it shows the importance of wording. If we take a look at your votes, you'll see that there's a pretty big battle happening between answer choice D, which is correct, and answer choice B, which tempts a lot of students. We also have some in A, but I'm seeing people abandon A, so I'll just talk about B and D. If you have a lingering question about A, though, don't hesitate. Please ask in the private Q&A. Hannah will be happy to help. Now, what is it that you love about answer choice B? What about B makes it look bright and shiny and beautiful? The fact that it says what? Amy, that happens to a lot of students. They switch, right? But don't worry, we're going to break it down so you can see why it is what it is. Right, reconciliation. That sounds so good because the author is trying to reconcile the arguments that's happening between the humanists and the scientists, right? Why is B wrong, though? Even though it's got that one great word, what is B doing that's incorrect? Yeah, it says that the views in the second and third are correct. Oh, remember we said at the very beginning says that they are incorrect. They're in need of correction. So answer choice B is out. Notice answer choice D is correct because it's using a general synonym placeholder. Instead of saying a solution or reconciliation, it says to present an alternative to the views in the second and third, and that's true. The author feels differently than second and third do. This is how the test makers are tricky. They put a word They know you want to see in a wrong answer and surround it with wrong words, and then in the right answer, they use like a general word or a synonym. That's why the right answer is what it is and why the wrong is wrong. All right, question 25. This is an inference question because it's talking about the author suggests. Where would you be researching this question? Because it does give you a clue. It says author recommend. Where does it talk about how the humanists could modify their point of view? Careful, careful. Notice it says, the author recommends that humanists accept which of the following modifications. In paragraph 2, the author calls the humanist absurd and ignorant, so on and so forth. But where does the author suggest they do something different? Yeah, that's going to be in paragraph 4. So paragraph 4 is where you should be researching for this. This is one instance where you might literally just be skimming for humanists. You'd be going through here going, okay, what does the author say that, humanists should be doing? And you go and look for that. And that's, again, why we research, so we can get there. Taking a look at your answers, we do have the majority in the right one, answer choice C. And where exactly is that coming from, everybody? What is the line that makes answer choice C correct? Because, again, it's not just willy-nilly that we're choosing in this. There's an exact line where this happens, right? Right in lines 47, 46, and humanities, in fact, profit from attempts at controlled evaluation. And notice that controlled evaluation, that is something set, something like a scientist would do. You notice here it says that the acceptance of controlled evaluation, and we get to see that same sort of language popping up for us. In terms of the wrong answers, answer choice A says an irrelevant comparison. It says that scientists are less interested in one thing than another, bodies in motion in relationship to mathematical models, and we never learn that. Notice B is a similar trap we saw before, this spiritual element that science does not account for. That is not talked about at all in this paragraph. That was in paragraph 2, again, and that's not something that the author would suggest they do. That's something that humanists already are doing, thinking about the spiritual element. And answer choice E. E talks about the practical survival of mankind. That is paragraph 3, not this paragraph. So the test makers are very good at giving you answer choices that bring up wrong paragraphs. All right, question 26. What were you doing to solve this question as soon as you read through it? I'll tell you that this is another inference question, as it says author suggests. What did you do right away? You go to lines 27 through 28, right? Now, is the right answer going to be word for word what you're reading in lines 27 through 28? No, especially not because this is an inference question, right? You need to get it from the context, right? This is saying, what are the humanists considered to be? So what does the author suggest humanists are considered to be? And notice this is considered by the scientists. Now, this is very similar to another question we did where the test makers have a super tempting trap. And you'll see what's happening when we look at these votes. We have a lot of U and A, but A is wrong. And answer choice B is correct. Let's talk about why. This is very common that we see a lot of votes in answer choice A. Answer choice A is tempting because it says emotion. And we absolutely learned that humanists are interested in emotion. What's wrong with this, though? Humanists care about emotion, but are they wildly emotional people, right? Psychologists are interested in emotion. Does that mean that they are bipolar? Right? We don't have that information. This is too extreme. They're taking it too far. Exactly. Now, what words match up from the paragraph with excessively impractical? What words can you see literally in the text that would survive with, or that would go along with excessively impractical? Okay, a lot of you are focusing on the exact lines. Remember, we said it would be around. If you go just a little bit down, useless. There we go, useless, because they serve no immediate for the practical survival. So people are bringing up practical survival, just make sure you get that no immediate, that useless out of it. That is excessively impractical. Please note, answer choice C talks about being logically inconsistent. It's not that they're inconsistent, it's just that they're interested in things that the scientists think don't matter. Please note, if you were out of time at this point, which many of you might have been, it would be perfectly okay to simply guess on question 22 and move. But if you were to do it, go ahead and cast your vote. Everybody let me know. What were you thinking about for question 22? This is the one we skipped because we didn't have a clue. Give it just a little bit longer. The nice thing about doing this question now is that you have the other questions, the other research you've done under your belt, and that can help you find the right answer here. I will say this was a tough question. This was the other hardest question in the set, in case you're curious. The last question we did and this question are the two hardest. We have a lot of people in answer choice A, but answer choice A is wrong. As is B, as is C. Don't worry, we'll talk about all those. Answer choice D is right. What does answer choice D remind you of, everybody? What does answer choice D sound really, really familiar to that we did not too long ago? In fact, I even let a little hint about it out previously. Well, Walter, it is coming from a specific line, but it's coming from that line we investigated previously with the humanities, in fact, profit from attempts at controlled evaluation. And controlled evaluation is something that scientists do. So if you can remember us using that line to solve question 25, Walter, you were absolutely right then. Yes, the right answer to 25 says that humanists are doing controlled evaluation, a sciencey thing. So when we read answer choice D, and it says that humanists have profited from science, yeah, because of controlled evaluation. Now, is this an easy question? Definitely not, but that is how you could use previous work to help yourself out here. I know a lot of you might be wondering, why is A wrong? Well, if you go back to where scientific humanism is, and that's what makes this question tough, you got to research. Scientific humanism is attempting, as it does, to combine the common elements of both disciplines. So we're supposed to be doing both. But answer choice A just talks about it going in one direction. It talks about it going from science to humanities. It should be doing both of those things. B talks about the clear understanding of people as an objective that they have not yet come to share. However, if you do rereading in this paragraph, you will see that that is something they actually both have. Their objectives remain the same, a clear understanding of people and their world. So this is actually going directly against when they said they have not come to share this. And last but not least, answer choice C. This brings up aesthetic experiences are a little used to the study, and we don't know a lot about aesthetic experiences. That really wasn't mentioned. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, Jeff, how could I possibly have the time to research this question in its entirety? You probably wouldn't. And that is why you would skip and guess on this question so you can get to other easier questions that are later in the set. All right, that was really everything that we had to showcase here today in terms of how to read a passage and also the questions associated with it. The only quick thing that I want to tell you about comparative reading is this. This is going to be real fast, I promise. And that is comparative reading is where you have a passage A and a passage B. The good news is, though, everything we just talked about today is how you will approach these passages. You will be reading them in the same way, doing the questions for the most part in the same way. However, in order to succeed in comparative reading, you really need to have a strong foundation in regular reading comp first. That's why we want to give you the opportunity to practice what we've just talked about on standard reading comp passages. Now, you'll notice in your post-session assessment, we give you a comparative reading in case you want to try it. And I'll even list our channel lesson about comparative reading in case you're eager to do it early, all right? But we will do comparative reading in depth in our LR3 lesson, which will give us a chance to talk about it again, all right? So just heads up, comparative reading uses the same skills, practice what we have shown you here tonight, and it's going to give you a leg up on these types later on in your studies. Otherwise, everybody, your homework is very standard. You have a post-session assessment and your high yields. You'll notice as well that there are some time sections You actually don't need to quite get into the timing yet. Don't get me wrong, if you're feeling eager, you can time these. But right now, it's okay for you to just use these time sections as reading comp practice, or instead just use teach me more and test me more. And I'll have that same advice for you in the recap email. All right? But timing is something we will talk about in our next lesson next week after LR2, and we'll talk about how you can integrate timing into your studies more consistently. All right, all, that is it for the lesson. As always, thank you for hanging with us. I know reading comp can be tough, but you just did 4 straight hours of it plus 2 minutes. So really good job on that count. As always, if there is anything we can go back over with you or discuss, stick around, let us know. We're not going anywhere. Otherwise, have a great rest of your evening, a great week. Do this homework, and we'll, of course, see you again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel for LR2, super important lesson, talking about assumption family questions. It'll be good times. To those of you saying thank you, you are more than welcome. Thanks for hanging with us, participating in all your hard work in this session. Anything we can answer for you, though? Something on your mind? Curious about? If so, shout it out. A question you'd like me to go back to, an answer choice you'd like me to review in more depth. That is why we hang, so we can take care of that stuff with you. Anything at all? Good question in the sidelines here about the total number of questions you should be aiming to get right. So what you want to do, and this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about in our next lesson, especially as it relates to timing, but you want to think of what is your goal score on the test. And of course, the test is scored from 120 to 180. So you want to find a number in there that's going to give you a good chance of getting into the schools you want to go to, potentially even getting scholarship dollars. Okay? Then you want to compare that target score to the number of questions you need to get right in order to achieve it. You can see a list of number of questions and scale score on page 4 of your lesson book. You can also just open any practice test PDF going into your online account, going into the prep test library, and just scroll to the bottom and it'll show you the skill score conversion chart, meaning the number of questions you need to get right to reach a particular score. It varies ever so slightly from exam to exam, but overall, you can get a sense of about the number of questions you need to get right. So, for example, to get a 164, and I'm just choosing this number out of a hat, 164, you need about 80 questions, right? Now, that doesn't necessarily divide equally in 4, though it could, meaning you could be shooting to get 20 questions right in each section. However, as we talked about, reading comp has a lot more questions and logic games actually has a lot fewer questions. So usually that number is going to change ever so slightly from section to section. But once you've got that total number correct that you need, you can then divide it up per section, how many you need to get right. And then you can divide it up per passage, how many questions you should be getting right. But if you were shooting to get 20 questions right, you'd be looking to, of course, get about 5-6 questions right per passage. And that would really give you an opportunity to let those super tough questions that we showcase go, to skip them and just guess only doing them if time allows. So that's definitely a little bit more of an in-depth analysis you need to do to figure out how many questions you need to get right. But figuring that out is very useful. And again, it's something we'll talk more about in our LR2 lesson, or at the end of it when I'm talking with you about homework and continued practice. All right. Anything else? Generally speaking, the easiest section to improve on is logic games, just because it's a part of the test that people are so unfamiliar with, right? And so you don't have any bad habits. You don't have any good habits, and so you're just sort of building up from scratch. Whereas I said earlier today, reading comp can be one of the slower, but it still can be done. Brianna, you're very welcome. Have a good rest of your night. Again, though, do realize that anything can happen, and it depends on the student. And when I say anything can happen, I'm saying that after like 13 years of teaching and seeing every sort of score gain imaginable and seeing different people succeed in different areas, right? If there's an area that you like, sometimes that can be easier to improve on because you enjoy studying that thing. So please note that when I say what's generally easiest, I'm just saying normal. That's not necessarily going to always be the case for you personally, right? Anything else out there? And it's really fine for people to ask questions in the private Q&A, and then I answer them. So does Hannah, because she's amazing. If everyone wants to be more personal, perfectly okay to use that area. That's what it's for. Any other questions out there? Going once. I see some typing. Just hang it a little bit longer. Amy, have a good night. We'll see you next time. As always, everybody, if any questions come up between now and then, be sure to drop us a line. Let us know via email, okay? See ya. And just double checking the list here. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions from anybody. As I just said, if you do realize you got a question, drop us an email. Let us know. Otherwise, you know the homework you need to do. It's the same as always. Do that post-session assessment. Do that high yield. As I said, for those time sections, it's perfectly okay for you to do those passages as individual passages, practicing what we've worked on. Also perfectly okay for you to use Teach Me More to do some reading, do some channel lessons, or Test Me More to do additional questions. As we also talked about, once you feel comfortable with what we've covered here in tonight's lesson, as well as our previous lessons, it really is okay for you to work ahead. And as always, if you need anything at any point, just send us an email. All right, all. Have a great rest of your night. We'll see you next week.